across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm John Pienaar with Drive on Times Radio. Whoever in the Labour Party imagined that government would be easy? Well, no one, presumably, and certainly no one with any sense. Locked into a pay dispute with striking doctors, a wave of union militancy building in the public services, and now, today, a new hardline leader elected to lead one of those big unions, Unison. And I'm going to tell you more about that in just a moment. Keir Starmer's government maybe needs more than luck. It needs help. But now, just as we come on air, help may, just may, be at hand. NHS bosses have been calling on the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, to take the doctors' dispute to arbitration at ACAS. Well, will he agree to that? Will the doctors agree to that? And here is another question. Has ACAS got involved already, offering to help find a compromise and a deal? I'm going to be talking live to the Director of Dispute Resolution at ACAS in a moment to try to learn more. And meanwhile, what has certainly come as unwelcome news in Downing Street earlier, the giant public sector union Unison has elected a hardline left-wing militant as its leader. Andrea Egan was expelled from the Labour Party for liking Marxist messages on social media. She's pledged to hold the government's feet to the fire, which is, after all, the job of a public sector union leader. But Andrea Egan seems to mean it. And by the way, would life be any easier for the government facing public pay demands just now? Whoever was leading the unions. Let's talk about that. What are you thinking? Send me a text, 87222, start with the word Times, or a tweet to @TimesRadio. Now, there is some good news, at least if you're a student keen to study in Europe for a year, as happened before Brexit. The government has struck a deal with the EU to make that easier. I'm going to be talking to the Cabinet Minister, Nick Thomas-Symonds, live about the deal, about the cost, about where it all goes from here. First then, Keir Starmer's control over Labour, it has been, it seems maybe weakened significantly. One of his key backers has been ousted by a left-wing union leader. The grassroots activist Andrea Egan promised to review Unison's relationship with Labour after ousting the incumbent General Secretary Christina McAney in an election. Oliver Wright is the policy editor at The Times. Hello to you, Oliver.
Hello.
Hi, Ollie. So, well, Downing Street ain't going to say it out loud, but in their hearts, ministers in the government, they must surely have sunk those hearts on the news that a left-wing militant is now at the top of Unison, surely.
Yeah, I think there would have been a groan all round in Downing Street on this news. I mean, they've been really hoping that the current General Secretary of Unison remained in post. But obviously, as you said earlier, Andrea Egan got that good job. She won 60% of the vote. Now, why does it matter? It matters in part because Unison is one of the biggest donors to Labour. In the run-up to the election, it gave 1.49 million to the party to help fund that campaign. And there is a question mark over whether that money will be forthcoming in the future. Egan has made it clear that if that money comes at all, it certainly won't come without strings attached to it. And then the second thing is really about Starmer's own control over the Labour apparatus. The way in which the Labour Party is structured, its ruling National Executive Committee has a significant portion of union representative on it. And Starmer needs allies on that body in order to enforce his will across the party. And if you have unions that are not sympathetic to the leadership, that makes life for Starmer very, very difficult.
I mean, clearly so. And so now we have Unison led by a pretty tough new General Secretary. And that's alongside the other big union in the public services. That's Unite, which is led, of course, by Sharon Graham, who's not always by any means minded to be obliging to Keir Starmer's government.
No, that's absolutely right. And you've got a number of other unions, the CWU, the Fire Brigades Union, ASLEF. They are all due at some point to hold votes on basically disaffiliating with Labour, which in blunt terms means no more money. So, it's not a good picture all round. And then you have to look at this whole question of what it means for industrial relations. Unison represents a huge number of workers in the public sector. Now, are they going to be, under their new leadership, as sympathetic to the government's fiscal position as they might have been in the past? Or could you see, Unison workers following the BMA and taking a much more sort of hardline and radical approach to public sector pay than has been the case in the past?
Yeah, I mean, the days only when some trade union leaders and Labour politicians used to call each other comrade at the Labour conference, and it was never, frankly, very pally. It was always a fairly guarded, fraternal relationship. But now it's moved way beyond that, hasn't it? And the pay disputes or the pay deals, which have to be settled, which could easily develop into disputes, they are lining up, and there are many.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think if you were Unison and the new leadership at Unison, you would be looking at the doctors and saying, well, they're pretty well paid as it is. Why is it that we agreed to settle for far less money than the doctors are prepared to settle for? Maybe we should show some of our might to try and get a better deal for our members, and that certainly was the sort of the Sharon Graham argument that unions needed to really sort of stop playing national politics and get back to the business of really sort of going and looking after their members and trying to win them the best possible deal best deal possible, even if that meant sort of alienating those in government.
I mean, we're going to be talking a little bit later on, very, very soon, about the doctors' strike action and what might be the way through that. But, I mean, relations between the unions, public sector unions and the government, it's fair to say they're pretty scratchy just at the moment. Now, it's not the business of unions and union leaders to roll over like puppies and have ministers stroke their tummies at any time. But that sort of scratchiness, it is more and more evident, isn't it? And you've now got a new leader at Unison who's talking about holding the government's feet to the fire. And that's a general expression of intent.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you want to be almost a little bit historic here. If you look back to the Blair government, one of the reasons why the unions went along and were content with New Labour was because they did oversee a number of very generous pay settlements. I mean, I think particularly of the doctors, who got a really pretty generous settlement under New Labour because there was a lot of money around. Now you've got a world when A, there isn't much money that the government has, and B, you've got a cost of living crisis. And you add those two things together and you are inevitably going to get fractious relationships.
All right, Oliver Wright, policy editor at The Times. As always, really great to talk to you. Now, let's talk about that story you heard about in the news a moment ago. The Prime Minister threatening to release £2.5 billion from the sale of Chelsea Football Club and send it to help Ukraine. Ministers have granted a licence for those funds to be used. The money, though, is frozen during a dispute with Chelsea's former owner, the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. And Ben Clapworthy is the Whitehall editor at The Times who's following the story. Hello to you, Ben.
Good afternoon, John.
Hi, mate. Can you just get us up to date with this story? I mean, £2.5 billion is a lot of money in anyone's money.
It is, and this money has been frozen in a bank account of a company belonging to Roman Abramovich since May 2022, when he was forced to sell his beloved Chelsea Football Club after the full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Now, the businessman insists that he has kept his side of the bargain and that it is for the UK government to set up a foundation and that he will then transfer the money to the government. Now, he's been written to today by the Sanctions Office saying that he must free up the funds. He has subsequently, sources close to him have said, no, he is standing by his side of the bargain. It is for the government, as I say, to start that foundation. So this is turning into a bit of a ding-dong between the Prime Minister and the billionaire businessman.
Right, so there's been a dispute over this £2.5 billion. And just to be very clear, Ben, this is Roman Abramovich's money. It's not Chelsea Football Club's money.
This is Roman Abramovich's proceeds from the sale of the club. Now, there's a lengthy legal battle going on in Jersey where another of his companies say that they are owed money from Chelsea. There's the legal battle to do with those assets being frozen, that bank account frozen in Jersey as well. The Prime Minister stood up today and said that Roman Abramovich effectively had 90 days to release these funds. But there is a second strand to the argument as well, and that is that Roman Abramovich believes that the money should be used to support all victims of the war, whereas the government says the money must be used inside Ukraine. And obviously the crucial thing is that all victims of the war can include Russian citizens living in Russia or, of course, people living in the disputed territory.
Right. Does it appear Lastly, Ben, does it appear the government or Keir Starmer would be on sound legal ground in taking this money and handing it over for the use and the help of Ukraine? One imagines that Abramovich would say, no, look, you're breaking the deal. This isn't what you agreed. But there must be a contract somewhere that you could lay before a judge.
Well, it's interesting that we were trying to get to the bottom of where this agreement is, where it was made, how it was made back in 2022. There was repeated questions to the Prime Minister's spokesman after Prime Minister's questions to that end. They were not really forthcoming in that information. The issue that the Prime Minister said that he was willing to go to court over releasing this money. Senior legal people have said that that would set a new precedent in the way that sanctions are administered. And interestingly, the sources close to Abramovich say that the letter that he received from the sanctions office made no mention of the possibility of going to court. So it could be that one thing has been said in Prime Minister's questions that actually, for political points, is slightly different to what was contained in the letter from the authorities.
Fascinating to see how this plays out, Ben. I mean, £2.5 billion. If it goes to Ukraine, that is a serious amount of money. Ben Clapworthy, Whitehall editor at The Times. Thank you. Now, coming up, the doctors' strike. It is a pretty high-temperature affair. Is it time for ACAS to step in, as has happened in the past, to try to resolve what looks like an intractable disagreement? Is that happening already? I'm going to talk to the director at ACAS in just a second. And why is the Metropolitan Police talking about the Freemasons? It's now 4:15. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio.
John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
So the resident doctors' strikes got going this morning, and Times Radio reporter Will Hobbs has been out at the picket line talking to striking doctors.
Well, we're here to the aid because 30,000 doctors overwhelmingly voted for strike action. And they did that because patients are not getting the care that they deserve. We know that we're understaffed. Patients are waiting longer than ever for appointments, and yet doctors can't get jobs. Compared to other European countries, we are severely short-staffed, and what doctors are saying is let's increase staffing levels so that we can treat those patients, as well as let's restore doctors' pay that's been lost over a number of years so we can keep doctors within the system.
So for you, is this more about the job issue, the training jobs, than pay?
I think both are equally important. We need to increase staffing levels because doctors are burnt out doing the job of multiple doctors, and patients are waiting longer than ever in corridors, in A&E, waiting over 12 hours when the wait used to be less than 4. But also, the doctors that we have, we are losing them to countries like Australia, and that is a waste of taxpayers' money to train them up and for them to leave. And so we must restore the pay of doctors to what it was back in 2008 when we had the world's best healthcare system, so we can retain those doctors and then give patients the care that they need.
So that was Will Hobbs of Times Radio reporting. The Prime Minister had this to say at Prime Minister's Questions.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear about the strikes. They're dangerous and utterly irresponsible. And my message to resident doctors is don't abandon patients, work with us to improve conditions and rebuild the NHS. But, Mr. Speaker, they left the NHS absolutely on its knees, waiting lists through the roof and confidence absolutely rock bottom. And Mr. Speaker, I take no lecture from them on industrial harmony. More days were lost to strike action on their watch than any year since the 1980s.
Keir Starmer in the Commons. Now, welcome to the programme, Kevin Rowan, the Director of Dispute Resolution at ACAS. Hello to you, Kevin.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining me. I'm looking now at your statement, the ACAS statement, which tells us ACAS is in contact with all the parties involved in the resident doctors' dispute. They are aware, says the statement, of the value that third-party assistance can bring, and that we have a team of experts who are well prepared and ready to help with the dispute. So Kevin, straightforward question, just looking at your statement. Is ACAS already involved, doing what ACAS does, looking for to get the parties together and start to find a compromise?
No, John, that's not correct. There's been some serious misreporting in the last hour or so about that. We certainly are talking to the BMA. We are certainly talking to NHS employers to make sure that we're keeping in touch as best we can around the kind of shape of the dispute, and to help, to remind those parties that we stand ready to support when the time is right for both parties to invite us in to do that work. We aren't involved in the discussions. There's been obviously some meetings this week that people are aware of. We're there to try and help. The colleagues are aware of those parties are aware of the help that we can give, but it's up to them to decide when the time is right for ACAS to become involved. We're not involved in those negotiations at this moment in time, and it's disappointing that there's been some misreporting really at this really difficult time in what is a really sensitive dispute.
Right, now that is clear and helpful as far as it goes. You are talking to the NHS bosses. We know, because we've heard them. They've told us, the NHS Confederation, for example, and NHS providers. Those bosses, organisations at the NHS have said they would like to see you involved. They want to see that arbitration get started. And you're talking to the British Medical Association. So look, the pieces are in place. You are ready and willing, and it seems capable, you argue, of doing something really useful here. And by the way, that is your point, isn't it? You're saying you've got experts ready to go in and look at this, what's going on in full detail, because it would need to be discussed in full detail with your people, but with your experts as well as both sides.
Yeah, so ACAS has got a really successful strike rate in terms of helping parties to resolve difficult collective disputes like this one. It's like 94% of the disputes we're involved in end up in a resolved situation. Now, no one's underestimating the challenge in this dispute. It's a really high level, as you were describing. There's really kind of embedded and deeply held positions on both sides of the table. So no one's suggesting at all that ACAS could go in and within a few hours this will be resolved. No. I think that the value of ACAS and what ACAS brings to a situation like this is where we're impartial, we're independent. We can kind of have conversations with both parties that allow us to understand where the room for compromise might be, where the red lines are. And as say, we've got some pretty experienced individuals who can help and have been really successful in helping parties get over the line. But it can only happen when both parties are ready for that kind of conversation and feel that it's right for an independent party to come in and help with that process. And other parties that aren't in the talks and say now's the time for that, but it's up to the BMA and it's up to the NHS employers to decide when the time is right to do that.
Yes. Now, look, the NHS employers, they seem to want to get you involved as quickly as possible. You're talking to the BMA. What is the problem? Why are you not getting involved now? Who needs to give you the thumbs up? I mean, the BMA talking to you, are they still reserving their position on whether to invite you in?
Well, John, let's be clear. The NHS Confederation have said there's a time for mediation. That's different to the NHS employers. It's the NHS employers and BMA that are in the talks, and neither one of those parties have said now's the time for ACAS. So this isn't one or the other side blocking that participation. It needs both parties to agree that now's the right time for that independent voice in the room. Yeah.
So look, obviously it follows you still need Wes Streeting to decide, look, we're in an impasse here and we need something to break the deadlock, and that can be you. And he hasn't come to that conclusion yet. And therefore the BMA, they haven't given you the final thumbs up to this either. I mean, do you reckon this is where we're heading? Because, I mean, there is a certain head of steam in this. A lot of people wondering how long can this deadlock go on? Because the longer it goes on, the more a lot of people suffer.
Yeah, I mean, everybody understands the impact of the action, and everybody, I think, hears the kind of causes from the BMA side around why they are feeling the need to take this action. I mean, what I would say about ACAS's involvement is all of our experiences, the earlier that we're involved
Yes.
in potential negotiations and discussions, the more likely, the easier it is for us to try and broker
Yeah.
a resolution. The more parties are in dispute, the more bitter sometimes
Yes.
that dispute becomes, and the more personalised and bitter people feel about it. So it's harder
Yes.
like roll people back from those positions. But as I say, just to emphasise a point, both parties have to be ready
Yes.
to have a different type of conversation with an independent party. And at the moment, neither party
Yeah.
is saying to us, now's the right time for ACAS to come in.
Oh, no, that's clear, and that's helpful. Last question. As you say, Kevin, the atmosphere in this dispute has got pretty toxic. Is ACAS an organisation that can take some of the toxicity out of this?
To be honest, John, it's not unfamiliar territory for us. Our conciliators have got a lot of experience of going into what are apparently hostile relationships that have broke down and become really embittered. It's not new territory for us, but the only way that you can resolve that is by having a calm conversation about what's going to work, where are the red lines, where's the room for compromise.
Yes.
And sometimes I say you can take the heat out of those conversations by having an independent party to talk to, and we stand ready to support BMA and the NHS employers in finding that resolution when the time is right for them.
All right, Kevin Rowan, Director of Dispute Resolution at ACAS, thank you for talking to me. Now, the Freemasons, they are taking the Metropolitan Police to court. This is after it's been announced that officers will have to reveal if they're part of the Freemasons. The group says it's discrimination. The Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, says the move brings relief to female officers who say the service has become a boys' club. On Times Radio Breakfast, Sean Butler, the Director of Membership and Communications at the Freemasons, he responded to Rowley's comments.
We have a number of issues with several of the points that were made last week by Sir Mark Rowley, in particular relation to the issue of female officers. What we say to that, as what we say to all of the points that he's made, show us the evidence. You know, it's a very easy thing to say in an interview, but what we'd like to see is the evidence of that. You know, we know that there are many thousands of female Freemasons all across the country who are very proud of their membership and have nothing to hide and are free and happy to talk about it. So, as with many of the claims made by the Commissioner last week, show us the evidence, point us to what you're talking about, and we'll be happy.
So that's Sean Butler there, the Director of Membership and Communications at the Masons. Shabnam Chowdhury is a former Detective Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police. Shabnam, welcome to you.
Good morning. Good afternoon, even.
Good afternoon. Good to have you here. What do you make of this standoff, Shabnam? How do you feel about the Masons in the police and whether they should, as it were, come out, declare their membership?
Yeah, I think they should declare their membership. I think it means not saying that you can't be a member, it's saying declare your membership. The Freemasons have been an old boys network for decades. It's an all boys club, and as for the guy that was on the interview just now, saying thousands of female officers or women are on the Freemasons, I can tell you now, in my 31 years of policing, I never heard a single female ever declare that she was part of the Freemasons. I think that policing needs to move on, and I absolutely support Sir Mark Rowley in recognising that actually, if you're going to be a member of a club, whether it's an all-male or whether it's a mixed club, then you need to declare that to the Metropolitan Police or to policing in general. Because overall, if you have a business interest, you have to declare it. If you ever been associated with somebody that is perhaps less disabled or being involved in some form of criminal activity from a family member or something like that that doesn't impact on you, you have to declare it. And this should be declared in exactly the same way.
Right. I mean, I hear where you're coming from. The idea that it's discriminatory against women, that's a familiar argument. And there's an argument which is equally old, which is the Masons, whatever they say, with a good deal of passion about being a social organisation, no harm here, nothing to fear. It's been suggested over years that Freemasons are about helping each other out, doing each other favours, and that sort of association in law enforcement creates problems about fairness being done, about rules being observed. That is the suggestion. utterly denied by Masons, but it is a worry that you clearly share.
Absolutely. Look, in my service, I think I recall many, many occasions where police officers that may well have been subject to discipline, who were up for criminal offences, who were vindicated one way or another. I'm not saying that they weren't innocent. The fact is there was always some suggestion, underhanded suggestion, that they may have been part of the Freemasons. And you've got a number of senior officers that are in those high positions that are part of the Freemasons. And perception of police officers in general is that these individuals are being protected. They don't know who they are. They don't know who they're sat next to. And they don't actually have to declare to those officers that they're part of the Freemasons. But if you're going to go into policing now, and times have changed, and you are part of the Freemasons, I think it's absolutely right and fair that you declare that as an association. And as he is saying, show us the evidence. Well, if you're that, open and transparent, then show us the evidence that you're not the way that police perceive you to be. And actually, their perception is their reality. I think it's about time that policing moved on. I support Sir Mark Rowley in his quest to actually ensure that officers are all being open and transparent in the job that they do and their outside business interests.
All right, Shabnam Chowdhury, former Met Police Superintendent. Good to have you on. Now, coming up, the latest for you from the markets. I'll be talking to Richard Fletcher from the business desk of the Times, and we're going to be looking at the government's plan to get Britain back into the European Union's Erasmus student exchange scheme. I'll talk to the Europe Minister, Nick Thomas-Simons, and we're going to hear from the man who is helping the Ukrainian government find and prosecute Russian war crimes. Now, though, it's 4:30. Time for the news with Tom Noonan.
across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Now, the Destinations Holiday and Travel Show 2026 is the ultimate event for travel inspiration. It's coming to Manchester Central and to Olympia, London in January. It's the perfect place to plan your next bucket list adventure. You'll find more than 700 top travel brands all sharing expert advice on the world's most exciting destinations. Now, you can enjoy also live talks from the Times editorial team and incredible guests like Sir Michael Palin, the presenter Anita Rani and more. And because you are a listener, you can claim up to 2 complimentary tickets. You only pay the £1.75 booking fee, and book now then at destinationshows.com and use the code TIMES2026. It's 4:34.
Times Radio Business News.
And hi to Richard Fletcher, the business editor at the Times. Hello to you, Richard.
Evening, John.
Welcome. What's new in the markets?
We had the inflation data this morning at 7 a.m. and that's really set the tone for the markets throughout the day. So consumer price inflation, that headline reading, came in at 3.2%. And that's a 10-month low and well below where analysts and economists had expected. They'd been looking for around 3.5% reading. So that's obviously that's hit the pound because it's increased expectations that we'll get a rate cut, so an early Christmas present for borrowers tomorrow from the Bank of England. So the pound down, and then boosted the FTSE 100. And as you'd expect, the house builders doing well because obviously they do better when borrowing costs fall. Some of the banks doing well. A sort of an early Christmas present now being a dead cert bet if you look at the money markets tomorrow morning at midday when we get the Bank of England decision.
Okay, and some more news on Warner Brothers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sure you've been following this battle for Warner Brothers. We had Netflix make a bid and then rival Paramount come in with a higher offer but a slightly more complex deal. And the Warner board has definitely swiped left on Paramount's bid. They've come out this morning and recommended that shareholders should stick with their original idea of selling off almost all of the business to Netflix rather than an offer which is a hostile bid from rival Paramount.
All right, Richard Fletcher, thank you.
Times Radio Business News.
Now, the resident doctor strikes have got going. I spoke earlier then to Kevin Rowan, the Director of Dispute Resolution at ACAS. I asked him whether ACAS was already involved.
We certainly are talking to the BMA. We are certainly talking to NHS employers to make sure that we're keeping in touch as best we can around the kind of shape of the dispute and to help, to remind those parties that we stand ready to support when the time is right for both parties to invite us in to do that work. We aren't involved in the discussions. There's been obviously some meetings this week that people are aware of. We're there to try and help. The colleagues are aware of those parties are aware of the help that we can give, but it's up to them to decide when the time is right for ACAS to become involved. We're not involved in those negotiations at this moment in time, and it's disappointing that there's been some misreporting really at this really difficult time in what is a really sensitive dispute.
Kevin Rowan there from ACAS. Good afternoon to Dr. Layla McKay from the NHS Confederation. Hello to you, Dr. McKay. Dr. McKay, are you there for us? No, I think we got you there now. I'm told, Dr. McKay. Afternoon to you.
Oh, hello.
We've got you. Good to hear your voice again, especially at a time like this. So you may have heard there, Kevin Rowan from ACAS, the arbitration service. They've got the experts ready to step in and help out in finding a compromise if they're invited in. They're keen to do that. They've got the experience needed to do that. All that's needed is an invitation. What's missing? Why are they not involved, Dr. McKay?
Well, clearly the government and the BMA felt like they would be able to resolve this themselves. But I think that what we can see from the fact that this strike is going ahead, that they have been unable to reach any kind of resolution, and ultimately that cannot be able to continue indefinitely. We do require a resolution, which is why we think that this is now the moment to move towards some kind of mediation service, because ultimately we do need progress here.
Right. I mean, you make this point clear to us, and you have, I think, before. Have you made that point clear to the Health Secretary, who does have, obviously, a decisive say in this?
We certainly are sharing views at the moment that it is time to really find a resolution to this. Absolutely. This is a message that we will be sharing and quite widely, and I know that many others are as well, because ultimately what we're seeing is healthcare leaders across the country trying very, very hard to manage these strikes, but this is one of several strikes, and each one causes so much disruption, yes, much stress, much expense, much difficulty for patients. And I think it's in everyone's interest a resolution is found. If a resolution cannot be found by the government and the resident doctors via the BMA, then we do need to look at other methods in order to make this come to an end.
Yes. I mean, when you say others are making the same point to the government, look, get round the table, let's have some arbitration. Who do you mean? Who else is echoing your call?
We've heard it from patient groups and from other groups representing hospitals. There is a wide and growing desire to see new action being taken here that will lead to more of a decisive resolution than we've been able to see so far.
So what are you told then, Layla? What are you being told by the government? If they're not doing it, why are they telling you they're not doing it?
Well, right now we are in the middle of strike action, and if the government does decide to go down that route, that would be a thing to do after the strike action. So I assume that they are considering all options at the moment.
Oh, really? So is it your belief that when this 5 days of action is over, maybe we'll see the government move towards that sort of search for a solution?
Well, I certainly couldn't speak for the government, but I do know that the government is very aware that healthcare leaders are very, very keen to see a resolution here, and it is incumbent upon them and the BMA to find that resolution. Whatever method they plan to use to achieve that, fair enough, but ultimately our ask is that they consider the methods that are available, because the ones that they've used so far haven't worked. It is now time to move to new methods. Okay,
is it your sense, I guess we'll see, won't we, but is it your sense that the government and the BMA, they may go down this route for sitting around the table looking for some sort of compromise when this wave of strikes is over? Are you at all optimistic that may be where we go?
Well, I certainly hope so. We really do need this to be the final round of strikes. We can't have this extending indefinitely into 2026 when so many patients are needing care and everybody's working so hard on the waiting lists, etc. It's not good for staff and it's not good for patients. So it is in everyone's interests to find a resolution. So it is very likely that both the government and the BMA will be considering how to make that happen.
It is true, I guess, isn't it, Layla, that the longer the strike goes on, the harder it is to break the cycle. The more toxic the argument becomes, with exchanging insults, as it were, because that's pretty much what's been going on. As angry as Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, may well be, that has also soured the atmosphere. And the longer this goes on, if there's more strikes after this, it'll just be many times tougher.
It certainly is a risk, isn't it, that as this sort of rhetoric continues, people do get a bit more entrenched in their views and positions, which is, of course, the opposite of what is needed to find a resolution that works for all parties. So, yes, I do think that there is the need to break this cycle now and say, OK, how do we actually move forward, which is ultimately what everyone wants.
Yeah, and I clearly sense from what you're saying, your view is that there has to be a solution, and you're talking about arbitration in which neither side loses face.
Yeah, clearly there are many points to be made on both sides of this debate. And it is very clear to everyone, especially to patients waiting for care across this country, that we can't just sit here in a place where there are two conflicting views and strikes are continuing. We do need to end this, absolutely.
I mean, Wes Streeting's anger that does seem to be pretty deep. And just looking at the way our listeners are responding, messages coming in very, very critical of the doctors for taking this action at a time like this during a flu epidemic, with Christmas now upon us. I mean, is that anger on the part of the Health Secretary understandable, and that anger on the part of people listening to this programme, the public, is that also understandable?
Well, I mean, I think that emotions can run very high at situations like this. Certainly, the Health Secretary is very aware that this is a particularly high-pressure time for the NHS, what with the rising flu numbers and the wider winter pressures. And as such, I feel the Health Secretary is aware that he has already given the resident doctors a significant pay rise, and he has put forward this new proposal, which of course was rejected by the BMA and its members, which did seek to address some of the challenges that they had raised. So I'm sure that when you put forward a proposal and it is not accepted, that must be frustrating. At the same time, the BMA must feel frustrated that they feel they have certain asks that they don't believe have been met. So yes, clearly this is the sort of situation where you get into a bit of an impasse, and you need help sometimes to break that.
All right, Leila Mackay at the NHS Confederation, thank you. Now, coming up after 5, the number of babies born to mothers by caesarean section has overtaken natural deliveries for the first time in England. It's a pretty remarkable milestone. We're going to be talking to the midwife and the inquiry chair, Donna Ockenden, to find out, well, what she thinks about this. Is it a good thing? Why is it happening? I'm going to talk to NHS England's National Clinical Director about, well, the start of this wave of strike action by the doctors and what it's going to mean for those of us coming into contact with the health service. It's 4:45 and I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio.
John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio. At Drive on Time.
So now let me welcome to the programme, as promised, Nick Thomas Simons, Cabinet Minister. Hi to you, Nick.
Hi, John. How are you?
Well, thank you for joining us. So look, you're announcing and you've set out the plan for Britain to go back into the Erasmus exchange programme for students to do exchanges between here and the European Union. It's Erasmus. It's named after a Renaissance Dutch scholar, for those who are wondering. And I do want to hear about that. That's an interesting development. But I must ask you about a couple of things, Nick, as you'd expect, which are high on the news agenda right now. I mean, there's a new General Secretary of the Unison Union, such a big public service union, and she is a hardliner who was expelled from the Labour Party because of messaging in support of Marxist messages. Doesn't sound like very good news. Are you worried?
No, look, I've not met Andrea yet, but can I first of all just say a big thank you to Christina, her predecessor, who worked so closely with the government, not least on the employment rights agenda. And indeed, in recent days, we've had the Employment Rights Act, as it has now become, that has passed through Parliament. With regard to Andrea, as I say, I've not met her yet. I, of course, congratulate her on winning the General Secretaryship election for Unison. I've no doubt she will want to advance the cause of her Unison members, and I will look forward to working with her, other union leaders, businesses and indeed civil society, as I've regularly done throughout my time as a minister.
Well, she's very proudly a hard case, and we've talked about her background. She's saying she's going to hold the government's feet to the fire. Look, I mean, we're at a stage where union relations between the unions and the government, with pay demands very much in the pipeline. This is concerning for the government, whichever way you look at it.
But no, I wouldn't expect a trade union leader to do anything other than hold the government's feet to the fire, whatever the government of the day is. But specifically, as you've mentioned, the issue of industrial action, can I just say in respect of the British Medical Association that I think it is highly irresponsible that they have taken the decision that they have to strike at this time. We know what is happening with flu. We know this is the depths of winter in our National Health Service, and I would urge them to get back around the table with Wes Streeting. Yeah,
I mean, the longer that doctor's strike goes on, the more painful it's going to be, especially for people who rely on the health service, and nobody wants to see that happen. Now, we've now got the ACAS, Advisory Consideration Service, saying they are ready to step in and help find a solution if that can be done. They've got experts who can help, they've got the experience. Is it going to happen? I was talking to the NHS Confederation, was saying, look, maybe this is going to happen after this wave of strike action of 5 days is over. I mean, can we hope and expect that might be the case?
Well, look, I know that Wes Streeting is exploring and has been exploring lots of different options and has been making proposals, including having additional jobs that are available after people have trained, having, a homegrown advantage within the system. So I know Wes has been doing all he possibly could to prevent these strikes from happening. But these strikes have to stop. And I repeat, they are deeply irresponsible. The BMA leadership needs to get back around the table.
OK, but no thought of ACAS at this point, in a word.
Well, that is a matter for Wes Streeting to judge. He is the person conducting the negotiations on behalf of the government. What I do know is he has been doing all he can to prevent these strikes from happening.
OK, well, now Britain's back in the Erasmus student programme. Why is that a good thing?
Well, first of all, it's a great thing because it isn't only students. This is about the opportunity for people to spend between 2 months and 12 months overseas. Yes, you're right, there's the very traditional way we think about it. We have a brilliant university sector, students taking a year out with grant funding from this programme. But it is also about our further education sector. You'll have seen, I'm sure, John, the further education sector warmly welcoming this announcement today. It's also about youth work placements. It's also about staff for professional development. I met someone who wants to do that with regard to basketball training only this morning, the sports aspect, but also adult learners as well. So we're talking about tens of thousands of people benefiting from this programme.
Tens of thousands. And it will involve work placements as well as studies, because that is a feature of the touring system which is there now.
Yes, so for example, we think about, say, someone who may be studying languages or something at university getting a year out. Equally, you could have someone who is an engineering apprentice who might want to go and spend some time overseas in another country to broaden their horizons. Absolutely, we shouldn't think about it only in terms of student placements.
What's it going to cost?
So I have negotiated a 30% discount, so it's a £570 million for 2027 to 2028. However, it's a mistake simply to see it that way, because clearly there will be an uptake from people here in the UK who will get grants from, as it were, that pot. But in addition to that, what I've also done is ensured that 10 months in, there will be a review based on the data of the number of people who actually take up the opportunity. And the reason I've done that, John, is there has been this debate between fair financial contribution and indeed the level of participation.
Yes.
I think where we've got to is a good deal for the United Kingdom, but I want to make sure that longer term that is absolutely based on proper data, proper numbers of participation, so that's what I've done.
Right. Look, I mean, the government was reluctant to go back into Erasmus. Your government was reluctant to do that. Now you decided you are going to go in. It's a good idea. I see the polls. There's a good deal of support for that. But what changed your mind? Is it the business of getting more Brits involved?
Well, I think the issue, and by the way, we announced we were in these talks back in May, so it's something that's been public for some time. But what I've found coming into government is, first of all, very firm red lines. No return to the customs union, single market or freedom of movement, but within that, definitely building a closer UK-EU relationship in our national interest. And the Turing scheme that we inherited is, first of all, there's an issue on numbers. I think last year there was just over 40,000, I think just over 43,000 who benefited. For Erasmus Plus, it can be 100,000 plus, so much bigger scheme. But also, Turing was about further education, schools and colleges. The Erasmus Plus programme is much broader with, as I say, sports, youth work, staff able to do the exchanges, adult learners. So this is a much bigger set of opportunities for young people and adult learners. And this is what this government is all about. Opportunities for young people to make the most of their potential is why I'm really proud to be making this announcement today, John. It's a really exciting opportunity that I'm looking forward to driving forward.
All right, thank you. Good to talk to you, Nick Thomas-Simons.
Good to join you, John.
Now, Ukraine. Across Ukraine, tens of thousands of war crimes have been documented since Russia's invasion. Now, The Hague has set up a commission for reparation. Evidence of atrocities is collected and analysed by Ukraine's prosecutor's office with the help of a British organisation which is led by Wayne Jordash KC, a human rights lawyer. He's joined us. Wayne Jordash, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Can you just tell us a bit about what your mobile justice teams are doing on the ground?
Well, we have a team of 60 lawyers here, prosecutors and investigators. 2/3 of them are Ukrainians. And we have spanned out across the prosecution offices to support their investigations. And when I say support, they do the investigations and we help to build their capacity to do so. Most of them, of course, most of the prosecutors and the police and the state security who are doing the investigations have never done this before. And we as a team have decades of experience in doing it. So we advise on the elements of the crime, advise on what investigation should be done, advise on when the case is ready to go to the court, etc.
And the evidence of atrocities by Russian forces from rapes, the abduction of children, the torture chambers, the mass graves, they are absolutely appalling and blood-chilling. And what are the prospects of justice being done in these cases?
Well, I guess it depends what your definition of justice is, and that varies, of course. But if the question is how many trials are there going to be eventually, then that is going to be, I suspect, a little disappointing. The suspects are mainly out of reach, and it's difficult to see how Ukraine gets hold of them. On the other hand, if justice is to be considered wider, I think there's more prospects. And you mentioned the Claims Commission. There's a registry of damages in The Hague. There's a Claims Commission now, and there will be a compensation fund. And so the idea is that Ukrainian documenters, including the prosecution and including the Ministry of Justice and other entities, are collecting evidence to send to the registry, and the registry will then log it. This is damage done to buildings, damage done to people, inhumane treatment, and so on. Any victim can file a claim. And then the registry will document it. The Claims Commission will consider it. They will have a sort of quasi-judicial function. And then the compensation mechanism will issue the compensation.
And the compensation, Wayne, is that to come from the Russian assets presently frozen, which the EU hopes and intends to use?
That's the idea. I mean, in an ideal world, of course, at some point Russia would admit what it's done and offer to pay reparations. But of course, that's highly unlikely to happen. So these frozen assets should be the main way of ensuring that compensation. And the assets will be held until Russia agrees to provide those reparations, or I hope it will be released so that it can pay through the compensation mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, the fear of Russian atrocities is just demonstrably well justified. And I guess it multiplies when you look at the argument, Russia's claim to take more Ukrainian territory, including territory that it hasn't conquered.
And it's more than just taking territory. I mean, why this attack by Russia is so full of crimes is because the objective of the illegal invasion is to subjugate Ukrainian people, is to deny them sovereignty and to extinguish their identity. And if you think that through, what does it mean to extinguish an identity of a people who are holding on to it fiercely? It means war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide. So the more that Russia fights, the more territory it is able to take, the more it's able to subjugate the people in that territory. And that when Putin talks about taking territory, he's really talking about subjugating the people of that territory.
All right, war crimes investigator and analyst Wayne Jordash, KC, thank you so much. And Wayne was on the line there, live from Kyiv. More coming up on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 5 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar here on Times Radio, and here are the headlines. Roman Abramovich is being urged to hand over £2.5 billion or face legal action from the government. And police in London and Manchester will start arresting people who chant "Globalise the Intifada" on pro-Palestinian marches. And coming up, 45% of births last year were caesareans. That's nearly half of which chosen in advance. Midwife and inquiry chair Donna Ockendon's joining us live to talk about what's driving it, whether she thinks it is a good thing. NHS England's National Clinical Director for Critical Care going to be joining me too, talking about the beginning of this next wave of doctors' strike action and why pigeons are causing a problem in Norwich.
This is Times Radio.
And here's the news with Tom Noonan.
Thank you.
across the UK on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
It is great to have your company on Drive on Times Radio. I'm John Pienaar. We have passed a major and significant milestone as a society. If you're a family with children, you may even be part of it. Not that you necessarily know that. The number of babies born to mothers by caesarean section has overtaken natural deliveries for the first time in England. NHS data shows about 45% of births last year were caesareans, nearly half of which were chosen in advance. This is after changes to NHS guidance, which gave women the right to choose surgical delivery for non-medical reasons. Let's then talk to Donna Ockenden, the British midwife and community activist. Hello to you, Donna.
Hello, John.
Thank you for joining us, Donna. Could you just share your thoughts with us on C-sections now overtaking natural deliveries?
So, John, I think there's multiple factors. It's a complex jigsaw. I think that we've got a rise in maternal age. We've got mothers with complications such as diabetes, raised blood pressure. We've got women who are perhaps overweight, or women who may make a choice after a difficult experience first time round. They say when they then have their second baby, understandably, I want a caesarean section this time.
Yes.
So lots of different reasons.
Is there such a thing, Donna, as a preferred way of giving birth from the point of view of the child or the mother's health and well-being?
I don't think so. So as you will know, because we've spoken a number of times, I've listened to and spoken to thousands upon thousands of families in recent years. And what they say to me is they want a safe birth. They want to walk out of that hospital with their baby well, with mother well. And so I think it's got to be what women want, and as far as we can, ensuring that it's a safe experience for mothers and babies.
Yes, it is so, isn't it, that there are regional variations in the incidence of C-section births. And is there an easy explanation for that?
I don't think there is. Again, it'll be this complex jigsaw. We know, for example, that women with these pre-existing health conditions who live in deprivation, who live in poverty, because we have got an unequal society, they are more likely to have poorer outcomes in their maternity care. So again, I don't think, John, that it's one size fits all.
No. And it is certainly the case, isn't it, that in some cases, C-sections are, for want of a better phrase, a lifestyle choice. It is about fitting in the birth of the baby with a mother's, a family's, a couple's notion of what works best with their lives and what is most convenient.
Well, that's a tricky one. I'm not sure I agree with you there, because I don't see examples. And again, this is with thousands of mothers, fathers and conversations about convenience. I think we need to say that it is an operative procedure.
Yeah.
It requires more skill from what we call the perinatal team, that team around birth. There's increased time then for mothers to recover. I had 2 caesarean sections myself. I needed one for high-risk pregnancy.
Yes.
And then for my second birth, I had written all over my notes, must have C-section at 37 weeks. And so, and there are risks for mothers. So I don't hear, it may happen, but I don't hear from the thousands of mothers and fathers that I've spoken to that they're saying to me, Don, it's all about our convenience. I honestly have not heard that, I promise you.
No, I believe you, and I completely defer to your experience. I'm simply putting to you the suggestion you'll have heard, I've no doubt, many, many times, along with, of course, the idea of C-sections as an NHS convenience, being easier to process, for want of a better word, the birth in a maternity ward and schedule the use of the maternity bed and the facilities.
Again, and I talk to obstetricians, midwives, anaesthetists and everything on the ground, every single week. I don't hear that. I mean, what I know from the many, many maternity units I know across England is that in advance of any kind of birth, the really good consultant obstetrician will sit down and explain pros and cons, risks and benefits. And then it's the mother to make what I call, and it's not an informed choice, it's an informed decision about what is right for her.
Yes. So when you look at these numbers, and you'll have studied them, do you see a pattern which, with your eye, you can analyse and maybe come up with some sort of thesis of what's going on here? Or is there no simple, single, or even number of explanations that really account for it? It's an accumulation of factors.
I think you're absolutely right, John. I think it is an accumulation of factors. I think it's a multiplicity of reasons. It's going back to that picture of the jigsaw again. So that, I mean, that's what I would say to you. Lots and lots of different factors have contributed to this. And the importance for every single mother I've ever spoken to is, I want safe care.
Which sort of suggests that, that the balance between C-section births and natural births, it has moved in the direction it's moved, and pretty steadily. There's no reason why it shouldn't go the other way, according to preferences. And I now keep on using words which require quote marks around them, but fashion.
I don't see it as fashion. I do think that, there have been instances, and you'll know, we talked about the Shrewsbury report, when had there been earlier recourse to caesarean sections in a number of cases, the outcome would have been better for mothers and babies, without a doubt. We had a conversation about that a few years ago. So I think it is a complex picture. And for me, we do have issues with maternity care in this country, significant issues. Yes. And we now need to progress, at a real pace to ensure that all women have got access to absolutely safe care, and that outcomes across the country are not decided by postcode or where you live or your social class or whatever. But it is complex. It is complex.
And we've talked about those concerning aspects a number of times. It is always so good to talk to you, Donna. Thank you. Donna Ockenden there.
Thank you.
Now, Keir Starmer may have a new headache ahead, as if he needed another one. Labour's biggest trade union donor, Unison, has a new General Secretary, Andrea Egan. That's a woman who's promised a comprehensive review of the group's relationship with the party. Anna Mihailova joins us, Times Radio political editor. Hello to you, Anna.
Hi, John.
Anna, do give us your take on this.
Well, it's definitely not good news for Number 10. As you say, not only has this been a blow in terms of this is the biggest union funder for Labour. Keir Starmer's also lost an ally in terms of the union general secretaries, and Andrew Egan, I think we can safely say, is not a fan of either Keir Starmer, nor Rachel Reeves, nor a lot of people in the cabinet, and generally of the government's direction. So I think one of the obvious, you mentioned disaffiliation. She has said that she will review Labour affiliation. I think realistically that's not actually going to happen, probably, because it would require members to vote it through. But I think it's more a statement of intent that's significant, and the fact that she will be a very critical and senior voice, very critical of the government, and also, incidentally, an ally of Andy Burnham.
Oh, well, tell us more about that. I mean, any of our conversations end up in that general direction. Tell us more.
Well, I think lately all of our conversations end up in that general direction. I think we've had a break from the Andy Burnham conversations for a few months, but they are...
a space to talk about Wes Streeting. Yeah,
exactly. No, so Andrea Egan has said she is a fan of Andy Burnham. She has praised him as the King of the North, and she has also made clear, interestingly, that she does not like Angela Rayner, and she certainly does not like Wes Streeting. But it's that interesting shift on. Firstly, we were seeing a trend towards more going to the left in terms of the unions under Keir Starmer. And then, of course, the big question of if there was a leadership challenge, who would the candidate of the left emerge? Would it be Angela Rayner, or could it be Andy Burnham if he finds a seat to Parliament? Now, interestingly on Burnham, there's increasingly this talk about... there were the reports that he's looking for a seat and has possibly apparently found a seat that he could try and win next year. And as a backlash to that, I've heard that some people in the Whip's office have been privately saying that there would be serious attempts to block him from doing that. Now, we've already heard that the NEC might stop him from being on the candidates list, and there are a couple of mechanisms they could do that, because there are several, in classic party bureaucracy, there are several rungs that he would have to go through. And at the same time, there's this murmur from sources in the Whip's office, apparently, I'm told, that they could even play funny buggers with the by-election, and if there is a by-election, not schedule it on a time that was convenient for any potential leadership contender. I think all of this, if it were to actually transpire, and if there was a serious challenge by Andy Burnham, would just make the government look very weak. And and could possibly backfire. But it's just these are the dynamics currently constantly being discussed.
It is a bubbling pot of intrigue. Lastly, talking just a moment ago to Nick Thomas-Simons about the re-entry to the Erasmus scheme. How's that playing?
I think the government would be very happy with how it's played. I think you heard from Nick Thomas-Simons that he thinks it's a much better scheme than the previous Turin scheme. He made quite a compelling argument for that in terms of the level of access it gives, that it's not just directed at students, that it would be open to a much broader type of person. One of the criticisms of Erasmus before was that it was a very middle-class scheme, and I think the government's very keen to emphasise that it would no longer be the case. And he sort of batted off that criticism that's coming from the Conservatives about cost. But I have to say, we're not even seeing many Brexiteers kick off about it. Even the Conservatives took some time to put out a statement today, and it wasn't as full-throttled as it could have been.
Interesting. Anna Mikhailova, thanks as always. So let's talk about the doctors' strike. It's been described as dangerous, utterly irresponsible by the Prime Minister. A third 5-day walkout this year. And it comes as hospital admissions soar during this flu bout. And there has been increasing calls now for third-party arbitrators, ACAS, to get involved. I spoke to Kevin Rowan, the director of dispute resolution at ACAS, about whether they were already involved.
We certainly are talking to the BMA. We are certainly talking to NHS employers to make sure that we're keeping in touch as best we can around the kind of shape of the dispute, and to help, to remind those parties that we stand ready to support when the time is right for both parties to invite us in to do that work. We aren't involved in the discussions. There's been obviously some meetings this week that people are aware of. We're there to try and help. The colleagues are aware of those parties are aware of the help that we can give, but it's up to them to decide when the time is right for ACAS to become involved. We're not involved in those negotiations at this moment in time, and it's disappointing that there's been some misreporting really at this really difficult time in what is a really sensitive dispute.
That's Kevin Rowan at ACAS there. Now let's say a good afternoon to Dr. Ramani Moonsinger, the NHS England's National Clinical Director for Critical and Perioperative Care. Dr. Moonsinger, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi to you. And do you take the view that it would be just maybe useful to get ACAS involved and try and break this deadlock?
So I think the important thing is that the government and the BMA Residents Doctors Committee keep talking. The BMA have said that they are willing to continue talks. We know that a good offer was put on the table very recently, which addresses a lot of the things that resident doctors are very concerned about. The number of training places available to them, fees for examinations, fees for Royal College memberships and that sort of thing. So a good offer has been put on the table. The BMA are open to more talks. It's not really for me to say whether that should involve ACAS or anyone else, but the important thing is to keep talking and get this resolved as quickly as possible for the benefit of patients.
Okay, now we've got a new strike upon us. What is going to be the impact of this wave of strike action on patient care?
So my job and the job of all of my colleagues working in the NHS is to keep patients safe. So the first message I would give your listeners is that if you need medical help, clinical help, you must come forward as you normally would. If you have something that you think is urgent or an emergency, you must come either to A&E or dial 999. If you need help that is less urgent, then phone 111 or go to your GP or to a local pharmacy. These are all services that are still available to help you. And alongside all of the emergency and urgent care that we continue to offer, we are continuing to do most of our planned activity as well. So if you have a planned procedure or appointment and you haven't been explicitly told not to come in, then please do turn up for it, because it is likely that it will go ahead.
Yeah, we are nonetheless seeing operations and procedures postponed, aren't we? I mean, how far are you going to be able to limit and stop harm to patients from the delays?
So we always prioritise the care of those who most urgently need help. So if you present with an emergency, we will look after you in that way. The risk is going to come as a result of having to postpone or cancel planned surgery. And again, we take a risk-based approach to making those difficult decisions. So there's no doubt that everyone is pulling out the stops to keep as much of even that planned activity going as possible. Senior doctors and other health professionals are working extra shifts in order to cover the gaps that have been created by resident resident doctors not coming to work. But we will have to see after the strikes are over what the impact has actually been on the delivery of patient care, particularly elective care.
And you must be worried about the impact of the strikes on the, that so important relationship between doctors and the public.
Of course, but I want to reassure the public that the majority of doctors are working, and whatever the public thinks about the rights and wrongs of the industrial action, we are here to serve you, and so we will continue to do that and to keep you safe.
All right, Dr. Ramani Moonsinger at NHS England, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Now, coming up, how universities in the UK are preparing to rejoin the EU student exchange programme. I'm going to be talking to the government's latest plan to protect youngsters from harmful content online, and also looking at why pigeons have got people in a bit of a flap in Norwich. It's now 5:19. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio.
John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Well, the UK is, as we've been discussing, rejoining the EU's Erasmus student exchange scheme. British students were frozen out after Brexit. The government has struck a deal to get them back in. It could end up costing £1 billion a year or so. The European Minister, Thomas Simons, told us it would be, a most helpful programme for all of those involved, and they would number in the many thousands. Vivian Stern is Chief Executive of Universities UK and is on the line. Hello, Vivian.
Hi.
Hi, tell me what you think of it all.
I'm really pleased. I mean, this is actually a kind of, we're a bit short of good news at the moment, but this is genuinely, anyway, from my point of view, I think this is just good news all round. I think it's amazing that the European Union, in thinking about what they want out of a kind of reset with the UK, have prioritised Erasmus. I mean, it's been really clear right from the beginning they wanted us back in. I think it's great for UK students because when you look at what happens to UK students who've been abroad, and it's not just universities, by the way, it's schools and colleges too, the students who have international exchange experiences, it might be studying or it might be working abroad or volunteering, they do better academically and they do better in the labour market afterwards. So it's just good all round.
And it's also not just university students, it is also apprentices and so on. So because the accusation before was maybe it's too much of benefit, disproportionately of benefit to middle-class students from middle-class families.
Yeah, I mean, that's on us, though, right? Because we haven't done enough as a country to encourage people from a really wide range of backgrounds to take advantage of these opportunities. And the Erasmus programme itself has changed. So in the past, it used to be true that it was quite hard for people who couldn't give up a kind of whole semester or go for a whole year to take advantage of these sorts of exchanges. But actually now it's much more flexible. So we do have to work to make sure that students from a wide range of backgrounds get these experiences, especially since we know from the data it's students who come from the least advantaged backgrounds who benefit the most, who, you see the biggest gain in their academic performance and in their labour market kind of outcomes, even measured through things like earnings. So it's a really powerful tool. It's not just a kind of, glorified holiday.
Yeah, I mean, previously, in its previous incarnation, more EU students came than Brits went. That was the case, I think, wasn't it? Under the new scheme, I mean, the balance may shift somewhat, but will the university system cope with the influx of Europeans who want to take advantage?
Well, so in the past, the balance looked more uneven than it actually was, because we had fewer students going for longer periods, and we had EU students coming in, but the universities managing the schemes would kind of balance it. So you might get 2 coming in, but for shorter periods to balance 1 going out. But it is, as I say, it's on us now to try and encourage people from schools, colleges and universities to take advantage of this opportunity. The UK is terrible at this. I mean, I'm always telling people how great the UK is in university performance, but the thing we suck at is getting students to experience some time abroad, and it can be a really powerful part of an educational experience. So we've got to do better, but this is a invitation on a plate for us to try and get across to people what the benefits might be, and that they don't need to be afraid that just because they don't have the language skills, perhaps it's not open to them. There are lots of opportunities, even if you're not fluent in another language.
Right, well, if that's the case, and British students are, on balance, not very good at taking advantage of an opportunity to go abroad and study or in this scheme work, why is that? Is it just about language and a reluctance to go and get involved and learn the language and face an environment where you're not, as it were, comfortable at home?
Well, I guess, look, I'm paid to say this, but UK universities are really great, right? So there's a bit of a pull factor, which means that university students from other systems want to come and spend time with here on Erasmus, but it might also partly explain why UK students are a bit reluctant to go abroad. But we've looked at this, and I think there are also things like students are a bit worried that they won't be able to function in a country where they don't speak the language. And we know that UK language ability has been, declining. Ability to speak second languages has not been something that we've been doing great at. And then there are things that really are particular to our system. So the ability of students to balance study and earning a living, being able to support themselves while they're studying, means a lot of them have jobs, and that's kind of then a bit of a barrier to kind of going abroad, because you'd have to give up your job. But also there are things that I think we can get over. So, for example, a lot of students say they're reluctant to go because they don't want to break up their friendship group. It might mean them, being in a different year group when they come back. And I think the only way to counter that is to sort of try and help people see what the opportunity might mean for them. And we know that these sorts of experiences, whether it's studying or volunteering or working abroad, are really powerful. So there's something really worthwhile in these opportunities. And I did it. I didn't do it through Erasmus, but I did it after I left university. It changed the way I see the world. And I think that that's true for a lot of people you talk to.
Interesting take, Vivian. Vivian, thanks. Vivian Stern, the Chief Executive of Universities UK. Now, pigeons. Have you got strong feelings about pigeons? Seems a lot of people in Norwich have got strong feelings, which are getting stronger in many cases. Those who feed the pigeons at Norwich Market are being called selfish by the council, by the city council. A falconer has been brought in, apparently, to scare the birds away. Campaigners are saying that pigeons are being treated unfairly. And shoppers, well, they think in some cases that it's a nuisance, especially around the food stores. Let's just dig into this raging controversy. Jenny Coupland is the local pigeon welfare campaigner at a group which is called Peck Savers. Hello to you, Jenny.
Hi there, how are you doing? You okay?
You've heard it a few times. You can't help smiling. Peck Savers. Tell me about your feelings about the council wanting apparently to see off the pigeons.
Well, I just think it's a bit of a shame, really. I'd really like to have kind of an informed discussion about pigeons, because what I find is that what's happened over the past decades or so, we've been kind of poisoned against pigeons, I think, really by pest control. And obviously pest control have got a vested interest in making money out of this situation. So when you actually dig into it, a lot of people think, oh, pigeons are dirty, they cause all these problems. But when you actually look into it and you look into the facts, they're not any more dirty or any more or less dirty than any other wild bird. We don't see a blackbird or a robin and think, ugh, dirty bird. That's not what we think. But we automatically are kind of I don't know, perhaps programmed, or we've just been kind of brainwashed, thinking the first thing you think of when you see a pigeon is dirty, and it's just really unfair. And I think my part in this is just trying to level the playing field a little bit and have a sensible discussion, because I think the Norwich City Council have just been fed a pack of lies, and then they're acting what they think is in the best interest.
All right, so Jenny, we're being manipulated by Big Pest.
Exactly.
That's part of Big Pest. Mind you, though, I mean, pigeons, they are dirty, aren't they? I mean, you don't see a ground covered in blackbird droppings, and when they take over an area, they do kind of take it over, and people object to them. You know, flying rats is what so many people call pigeons. I know you're not going to agree with that, but you know the reputation comes from somewhere.
Yeah, I think the reputation comes, but I think the term flying rat was first coined in 1966. I think it was just a made-up phrase by a New York Times journalist. But prior to that, they kind of fell out of favour, did pigeons, because we just, since the advance in technology and what have you, we used to use pigeons for communication during wartime, and they were our heroes. We gave them medals for helping us in World War II, and they fell out of favour. Technology came along, and now all of a sudden, the term flying rat's used, and then it's stuck, and then we just kind of lazily use it without thinking. That's the problem. We don't think, we just accept the term flying rat.
Well, you're a passionate advocate and supporter of these pigeons. I no doubt take the view that when I was a kid, I remember Trafalgar Square covered in pigeons, and it was quite fun to feed them, but there was a dispute very like this one about whether that was a good idea. And now you've got Norwich bringing in a falconer. I read that the hawks won't actually be attacking the birds, just encouraging them to go away, which sounds very friendly, considering hawks' instincts is to actually catch, kill and eat their prey.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, I was asked this question yesterday, and on the face of it, like naively, I said, well, kind of fair enough. I understand the council's concerns because, like you say, there's pigeon poo and all that kind of stuff. My argument is you should be cleaning it up, but that's a separate matter. And on the fact of the hawk, I thought, okay, a fairly innocuous way. Obviously, I don't agree with kind of displacing the pigeons, but it's better than going around shooting them, so I kind of accepted that. However, since yesterday, there's been 3 separate people contact us and said, listen, there's been the pigeons are being killed by this hawk, and that the falconer allows it and thinks it's funny, and he goads people who are there to feed the pigeons or look after the pigeons, or anybody who isn't in favour of the falcon. He goads them and criticises them and tries to intimidate them. So there's at least three pigeons that have been ripped up in front of people. People don't want to see that. Even if you don't like pigeons, you don't necessarily want to see one being brutalised and eaten in terror right in front of you. So this notion that Norwich City Council has hired someone that's a professional. I think he's taking a professional's wage because he's charging £1,000 a week for this service. Yeah. But he's not delivering a professional service, that's for sure.
Well, they've got a friend in you, the pigeons, at any rate. Jenny Coupland, it's nice to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
You too.
Coming up after 6 o'clock, Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday, and Mikey Smith from The Mirror are going to be with me on Pienaar and Friends. And before that, Jerome Starkey, who's defence editor at The Sun, is going to be sharing his memories. He's written a piece for The Sun about a secret Ukrainian rehab unit where British medics are helping to treat war-wounded Ukrainians and helping them just get their lives back together as far as that is possible. It's a moving piece, and I think you're going to be interested in our conversation with Jerome Starkey. Now the news with Tom Noonan.
across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Now, it is a good time to make this point. It's always a good time to make the point that we're in a world of fake news and conspiracy theories. So trusted news is just more important than ever. And here, the voice of the Times, Times Radio, we broadcast high-quality, balanced journalism. We do it live and we do it free through the day, and we do it every day. It's only possible thanks to the generous support of subscribers to the Times and the Sunday Times. And their contributions mean that investment in the best journalists around the world is there for you to read and watch and listen to. So join them. Subscribe today. Do. Just head to thetimes.com. Negotiations then for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, they drag on, and meanwhile the fighting on the front line goes on. The casualties mount and mount. Jerome Starkey is here with me in the studio. He's the defence editor at The Sun, and he's been travelling, has done many times to Ukraine. He's been to a secret Ukrainian rehab unit where British medics are there helping war-wounded soldiers try to rebuild their lives. Jerome Starkey, welcome to you, Jerome.
John, thank you for having me on.
I read your piece, Jerome, in the piece. It's a really good and in so many ways a moving piece. You met some remarkable people, didn't you? Some of them injured terribly on the front line and coping with that in a way which clearly you would have found quite impossible to forget.
Yeah, absolutely right. This was a story that really cut through for me. I've been, as you say, reporting the war for 4 years. I've been to Ukraine many, many times. And, like your listeners, like some of our readers, of course, it's the same for you and me. We get slightly jaded. It's hard to escape that. But when I went to this hospital, this rehab clinic, when I met particularly a lady called Elena, she's a mother. She was a pensions clerk. She'd volunteered to fight 4 years ago, nearly 4 years ago, on the third day of the war. And she volunteered because a relative of hers was paralysed in a missile strike in their hometown of Kryvyi Rih. And after I'd met her, after nearly 3.5 years of fighting, she was hit by a Russian drone. She lost both of her legs above the knee. She lost one of her arms, and her fingers on her other hand were damaged. I mean, she's, by any measure, horrifically injured, incredibly lucky to be alive. And beyond all of that, just inspiring in terms of the determination, the resolve that she's shown to get to where she is now on her journey to recover, and the resolve and determination she was showing to get even further. I asked her, did she have any regrets? She said, no regrets. She said, I had to step up to defend my family. And she quoted that ancient proverb, if not me, then who? And that has echoed through the centuries as a call to action, a call to responsibility. And I think she certainly felt that. And there were others like her.
And your story, your account of your meeting and your conversations with Elena, at the risk of sounding trite, she was telling jokes. She seemed to embody, to personify the spirit of that country, just keeping going under that kind of unimaginable pressure. I say unimaginable, I mean to someone like me, sitting at this safe distance in this warm and cosy studio, and there she was, having lost 3 limbs and joking with you.
She was joking. She said that her goal was to go back to her unit, and she looked around her missing limbs and joked she wasn't sure what her commander would have to say about that. And then she said that perhaps her family would also have something to say about it too. I think she's leaning on gallows humour, which is something I found in and among soldiers I visit all the time, not just among soldiers, but among ordinary people facing, as you say, unimaginable conditions. Humour gets them through the darkest times often. And in fact, I remember speaking when I interviewed President Zelensky, he alluded to a very similar thing. Obviously, a man who was a comedian in a former life facing equally unimaginable stresses and strains on him. She was turning to humour. The whole visit for me was a reminder, like a really visceral reminder of the price that not just Ukraine is paying, but the people are paying. There is a butcher's bill that both sides, in Ukraine and on Russia, both sides are paying an enormous price in terms of lives and in terms of limbs that cannot be got back, that cannot be recovered. I mean, Elena will be rehabilitated absolutely as far as possible, but clearly, and I say this a lot, any sane person who's seen what this war means on the front lines or in the rehab hospitals wants it to end tomorrow. They want peace. And yet what we also stress is that how this war ends is really, really important. And that's why Ukraine and its European allies are putting in so much effort to try and make sure that the peace deal that may or may not be on the table, the ceasefire that may or may not be on the table, is a good one and is one that will last and not just allow Russia to rearm and restart this in a few weeks, months, years' time.
And that's the real life, real person background to Volodymyr Zelensky when he's getting these calls for concessions, effectively surrenders from Russia, which come, in so many cases via the administration in the White House. He's got his own people behind him who have given so much and are ready to face so much for the sake of their country, their territory, their land and their home. Can you tell me just a bit about the British medics who are operating out there?
Yeah, of course. There's a small number. I was in order to meet them, there were certain conditions. I couldn't say where I met them. I can't say exactly how many of them there were.
Because it would be struck, it would be attacked.
Absolutely. Hospitals have been hit before, and I think if Putin knew where British soldiers, albeit medics, were based, then that might make it a more attractive target for the Kremlin. Nonetheless, there's a small group of them there. They include, and they change, it's not the same group there all the time. They included, when I was there, a rehab consultant, so an expert doctor in rehabilitation. There were physiotherapists, and there were exercise rehabilitation instructors. So that's slightly different to physio, but they are, if you like, personal trainers, but are very much specialising in how to train somebody who suffered a traumatic musculoskeletal injury to rebuild what they have left so that they can adjust. And those adjustments, might be, as Mike, the Lieutenant Colonel, the consultant, told me, those adjustments might be getting out of bed, climbing out of bed onto a wheelchair. It might be transferring from a wheelchair onto a toilet. But these baby steps, essentially, which are huge struggles to give them that independence. And in fact, the Ukrainian commander of the hospital, he was really interesting because he talked about his mission, not just in terms of rehabilitating the soldiers, but also how one soldier rehabilitated frees up at least 2 or 3 people in society. Because if there is a severely wounded soldier sent back to their home, then that's going to take 2 or 3 people to support them for the rest of their lives. And so for him, this was a mission about trying to keep the country functioning as best it can. But as a small group of British soldiers, sharing as much of the expertise as they can. But interestingly, and this is really interesting, of course, they're learning as well. And Lieutenant Colonel Mike, the doctor, said to me that one of the silver linings of a war like this, of course, is that there is so much medicine being practiced, that lessons are learned. And he talked about advances that Ukraine is breaking ground, pioneering medical science on, for example, efforts to regrow severed nerves in people's limbs, things that they're doing because they've got so much opportunity, quite likely to benefit all of us in the NHS when those lessons are reabsorbed and brought home.
Pleasure to talk to you, Jerome. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Jerome Starkey there from The Sun. Let's look ahead now to Times Radio tomorrow from 6. Kate McCann and Stig Abel with breakfast. Hi to you, Kate.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Tell me, what are you up to and what are you thinking?
We've got a lot on the programme tomorrow. The end of term is always a busy one, and there's lots of documents slipped out and lots of things to talk about, and this one is no different. We'll have some pretty big stories tomorrow in the welfare space. We're going to be talking about some defence stories, some use for money which could be channelled into defence. A suggestion from one of the opposition parties. We'll do a little bit of Christmas, but I think the main issue for us tomorrow that we're going to grapple with is this question of why the Met Police and the Greater Manchester Police have decided that they are going to arrest people who are chanting "globalise the Intifada." And I think for us, we're going to try and work out what's actually going on here. Is there a conflict between the police and the Crown Prosecution Service who say that chant does not meet the threshold for prosecution? And why are these police forces acting now? Have they been spurred on by what's happened in Australia, for example? So we're going to try and get into the wider issues surrounding that phrase and policing more broadly in this country, because we'll also be joined by Jess Phillips, who wants to talk about violence against women and girls. The strategy is published tomorrow.
Right, absolutely on the money when it comes to what's going to be on breakfast tomorrow with you and Stig. Kate McCann, thank you. Now, coming up, Pienaar and Friends after 6. I'm going to be with Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday and The Mirror's Mikey Smith. But before that, we're going to be hearing about the government's latest plan to protect youngsters from harmful content online. And when is boxing not boxing? We're going to be talking about that. It's 5:45 and I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio.
Radio. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Now, the Home Office wants tech companies to block explicit images on phones and computers by default. It's hoped the move would protect children, adults having to verify their age to create and access that content. Ministers are expected to pressure companies like Apple and Google to build in nudity detection algorithms. Roa Powell is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Public Policy Research. Hello, Roa.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Give us your thoughts on this, Roa. Home Office wanting Apple, Google to re-engineer their phones. Is that going to happen? It's not the way these companies like to operate.
I mean, it's interesting to see this call come out in the context of the government's wider strategy on online safety and child protection. We have rightly seen children's safety be a huge priority as regulation of AI comes on board. Tech companies need to be regulated, and it's right that children are at the centre of this. But government strategy has many different prongs. What we're really seeing here is another effort following on from the age assurance restrictions, which came in earlier this year from Ofcom in line with the Online Safety Act. At that point, it was platforms, people like Facebook, who had to verify age. Now it's seeming that they're going to the people building the phones themselves, having these age restrictions built in to the device you're using itself.
Yes. I mean,
but it's interesting, as you say, that they're doing it through pressuring rather than regulation, and it'll be very interesting to see whether the tech companies want to comply with this.
Exactly. And what is your betting, Ro, on the tech companies voluntarily complying with a thing like this? All of the pressure comes the other way against that kind of pressure change.
I mean, this specific example is an interesting one, and it might be that this goes the government's way. You can see that Apple and Google are already trialling technologies like this. I imagine their real concern here will be privacy. Introducing technology that automatically scans images on people's phones, even if the data never leaves the phone itself, will be a huge concern for people's privacy. And that is right that Apple and Google prioritize it. So it'll be interesting to see there. I think it's important to remember this enters into a much broader context of middle countries which have some power dealing with huge technology companies who in some ways outrank our government, other governments, and different governments around the world taking very different strategies of dealing with these big technology companies.
Yes, and you've got a government dealing with a government in the United States which is so protective of the interests of its companies, these tech companies. They've resisted, they've pressured, they've argued, they've threatened governments, trying to tread on the toes of these enormously powerful and rich interests.
Indeed, and you've seen the government's own tech prosperity deal with the US paused this week because of US government pressure. It's interesting to see where you can actually stand up for policies which are right and principled. And I think Australia offers a really interesting case study in this. So I'm sure many people will have seen Australia has taken a very different attitude towards child safety online, and they have actually banned under 16s from using social media, or banned social media companies from having under 16s on their platforms at all. And for the most part, tech companies will threaten to leave your market or threaten to pull out. And for the most part, we haven't seen that happen. So I think it's a really interesting play to see how much government can bet on kind of standing up to these technology companies and where they might actually fall down, because we do also need partnerships with them for economic growth and other reasons.
Right. So look, the IPPR, your organisation, is a think tank. How do you think the government should best go about this to get the kind of result that it hopes for?
I think it is a really difficult balancing act. I think when it comes to children's safety online, we do need to take principled stances. I think we've seen awful things happen to children as a result of the kind of pressures you see online and the content you see online, child sexual abuse material becoming more prevalent. And in response to that, it is right to see government prioritise this. Whether the response of calling for Google and Apple to do this on device protection will work, I have some serious doubts. So I think it's right to try all approaches, but if this one does not work, it may be the case that we need to consider more widespread approaches, more similar to how Australia has approached things. But this is something we are actively thinking about and considering.
Yeah, I mean, just a mere mention of following Australia down that route of binding legislation followed up by and supported by sanctions, that will cause a lot of nervousness in government if it becomes much more seriously discussed, because it is a collision course with the White House, and the government does not want that to happen.
It does not, and we do need to prioritise that as well. We have seen this month, for example, the same month that they have announced this call on Google to do more to protect children online, government announcing a closer partnership with Google. And it's really interesting to see how these circles can be squared. How can we at the same time become dependent on this technology and use it for our benefit? For example, using AI in education, using AI in public services, but at the same time call on these technology companies who have huge power to do more to protect children online. And I really do think there are some very tricky decisions for government to make, and I do not envy them in that position. I think there are some really interesting ones to levy. Another example being what you do with platforms like Google and having news media on their platforms. And in this case, Australia, again, took a stronger stance and made Google and platforms pay news providers for their content. And these are all really interesting payoffs that we will consider.
All right, Roa Powell at the Institute for Public Policy Research. Thank you. Now, let's talk about boxing, if that's what we're talking about in Miami. Stage is set, spectacle awaits, or is it a circus? The influencer Jake Paul is going to be facing the two-time heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua in a sanctioned boxing bout with a 245-pound weight limit. This is Friday night. The contest is being criticised for, well, being called a dangerous mismatch, among other things. And Tom Kershaw has joined us on the show. He's the sports reporter for The Times. Hello to you, Tom, on the line from Miami.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Tom, what's your take on this extraordinary matchup?
Yes, I mean, it's all quite surreal, really. We saw Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua warm up, sort of do the kind of ceremonial workouts yesterday, and the size difference between them is remarkable. And Jake Paul was sort of punching upwards as though he were, practically hitting a giant as a joke. But I mean, it's obviously, for as far as we know, a very real fight, and I don't think Anthony Joshua would go in there to take it lightly, which obviously means it seems to be very dangerous, given Paul has little credible experience, certainly against someone of Joshua's caliber, like you say, a two-time world champion, Olympic gold medalist. Paul was still breaking through on the Disney Channel when Joshua was already an Olympic heavyweight champion. So trepidation, I suppose, about what might happen.
Well, I mean, you don't want to talk about who wants to talk about a boxing match being dangerous, and that's what we're talking about here. I mean, it's hard to look at this as anything other than a really quite worrying, maybe, I don't know, a demeaning spectacle. Is that too far?
Well, I guess we've been building towards this point with quite a lot of these crossover kind of fights and influencers getting involved in boxing. I mean, for Joshua, people have criticised him for taking it, but when I spoke to his promoter, Eddie Hearn, I mean, if you're offered $50 million plus to have one of the easiest fights of your career at 36 years old and in the sort of twilight, can you begrudge someone for saying yes to that? I guess the question is more why Paul wants to do it. Obviously, he loves the attention and has this enormous social media following, but I know he was making eight-figure purses to fight against people far inferior to him. So why he's decided he needs to take this step up, perhaps it's to satisfy the Netflix audience, perhaps it's to grow his own profile, perhaps because everyone expects him to lose. If he does, it doesn't damage his brand. But it's certainly unlike a fight that I've ever covered before.
I mean, as for why it's happening, you answered the question. Those numbers are mind-boggling.
They are, and I think Eddie Hearn said that this isn't very far at all off Joshua's highest ever payday, which I assume would be the fights he's had in Saudi Arabia. So given that this is only an 8-round fight against someone who has never fought as a heavyweight before, clearly the interest is there. Whether people are watching it, out of fear of what's going to happen, I suppose there's a lot of people out there of the social media fan base that Jake Paul's built that are kind of watching, hoping he will lose, and that's part of the whole marketing gimmick. But obviously, it draws extraordinary interest, and Netflix have poured a huge amount of money into it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can remember the great Muhammad Ali at the end of his career fighting a Japanese wrestler in the ring. It was a little bit like a circus spectacle, and this is just not so different. It's a modern equivalent of all of that. But what does it mean for Joshua's reputation? Or again, is the answer to that $50 million?
Well, that's one answer, but it's obviously the way he performs still matters, because if he goes out there and is put under pressure, or he can't finish the fight early as everyone expects him to, it's going to damage. It will damage his brand and what people think he's got left. Obviously, he hasn't fought for over a year now since he was knocked out at Wembley by Daniel Dubois. So there will be a lot of people, quick to write him off if he doesn't impress. And I think if he doesn't win in the first couple of rounds, people will question how much he's got left, especially when he's finally. If we believe what we're told for the 1 millionth time, he's finally set to fight Fury in September next year. So he doesn't want to go into that without momentum.
And the promoter Eddie Hearn, I mean, he's so famous and so successful in his own field. I guess from his point of view, he just ends up the winner, a very, very big winner, whatever happens.
Yes, and I mean, he's obviously been with Joshua throughout his whole career, and they've had quite a lot of ups and downs together. He's not promoting this fight. He's just promoting Joshua. So it wasn't his brainchild, so to speak. It's all Paul. Paul is the one who has the connection with Netflix. He's the one who chose Joshua. So from Eddie Hearn's perspective, they're saying we can come over to America. Obviously, Joshua's only fought in America once before when he lost in a huge upset against Andy Ruiz. So this is a chance to come back to America, kind of restore his image over here, gain a huge profile in the US that he doesn't necessarily have, or certainly not like as we know him in the UK. Yeah. And a bigger star and an easier fight for a lot of money. So it's, when Eddie says people ask him to justify it, he says, I don't need to justify it. It's not our idea, but we're certainly happy to partake. Yeah,
and when you combine, the fact that we're talking about Anthony Joshua here, and when you talk about, the online potential of this spectacle, they can be pretty confident of a pretty vast audience.
Yes, I think the obviously Jake Paul fought Mike Tyson last year, which a 58-year-old Mike Tyson, which shows you the kind of chasm in levels he's jumping up here. He's fighting pretty much a ghost against an active heavyweight champion. But that fight I think did about 125 million streams on Netflix. It was the most streamed sports event in history. So I don't. Jake Paul's promoter told me he doesn't think it's going to get to that numbers because obviously Mike Tyson is such huge profile. It crosses into so many different generations. But he doesn't think he thinks this will be probably the second most viewed. So clearly there is a global audience who come out to watch this, and you don't have to pay a pay-per-view. It's already in your home if you've got a Netflix subscription, which most people do. Without trying to sound like a salesman for them, it's obviously much more accessible than some of these fights, especially in America, where they charge $90 to watch a heavyweight world championship fight on Box Office.
All right, good to get your thoughts, Tom. Thank you, Tom Kershaw, there, the sports reporter at the Times. Now, coming up on Pienaar and Friends, I'm going to be talking to Kate Ferguson and Mikey Smith. We've got a lot to talk about on the programme. We're going to be talking about the change at the top in the Unison Union. We're going to be talking about the police, touching on their various controversies today, the controlling of demonstrations, the internal issue, using the Masons and trying to get Masons to come out, as it were, and declare their membership. And we've got some other big things to share with you and get Mikey's thoughts and Kate's thoughts. And we want to hear what you're thinking. So do send us a text, send us a tweet, join in the conversation, maybe a voice note, and we can all chat very shortly on Pienaar and Friends.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar and Friends. Tonight, that's Kate Ferguson and it is Mikey Smith. And of course, it is you. Send me a text, send me a tweet, and we can chat after the news with Tom Noonan.
This is Times Radio.
Good evening, John. Thank you.
across the UK on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
It is good to have you with us on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in really good company. Tonight, that's Kate Ferguson, the political editor of The Sun on Sunday, back with us in the studio. Hello to you, Kate.
Hi, John.
Lovely to see you. And Mikey Smith, you don't see one without the other, from the Sunday Mirror. Hi, Mikey.
Hello.
Mikey, what is your thought for the day?
My thought for the day is, broadly, that Donald Trump might have had one of his worst days since coming back into office yesterday, and specifically because he so badly misjudged his attack on Rob Reiner. I'm going to be probably the umpteenth person who's come on your air to say lovely things about Rob Reiner today. But I've been trying to think about why, when he did that and when he sort of stood by it in questions in the Oval Office, why people were so angry about that. Because it has gained cut through. It's one of the things. He's said mean things about dead people before. John McCain, he was mean about after he died. Other people, various other people, he said unkind things shortly after their passing. But I've never encountered anything Donald Trump has said that has produced such a visceral reaction as him saying unkind things about Rob Reiner. Now, and I've been trying to work out why, and I think the reason is that Rob Reiner, very quietly, without anyone really noticing, installed himself as in sort of this canon of American storytellers who didn't just make movies; they wove the memories of your youth in a way that doesn't happen anymore, because in the 80s and 90s we had a monoculture where movies were much more of a shared experience. But he managed to, in the space of about 20 years, make a dozen or so films that were so broad without being rubbish, and he had a knack for spotting a line that would become something that would trigger a memory for you. So, you remember Peter Falk telling you he was only going to read out the good bits of the Princess Bride, and he was your granddad at when you were watching it. You remember Harry telling you that he wants the rest of his life to start as soon as possible. He didn't make movies, he made memories, I think. And Donald Trump severely miscalculated, I think, when he went after him and tried to make it all about him, as he does. I think that's an interesting thing, and I think it was the start of a pretty poor day for him. Between that and the other great miscalculation of the day, letting Susie Wiles talk to a journalist for 11 months.
Yeah, she may feel the same way about that.
Yeah, I imagine.
Given that that's what he's been reporting. On the Rob Reiner thing, before we move on, Katie, how did that strike you when you saw that?
Yeah, I was a bit bemused, to be honest. I mean, I think that the other thing, right, is that obviously there's a case up in court, but I mean the guy had just been murdered in his own bed. So obviously Donald Trump has come out and criticised recently deceased people before, but probably nobody that's just been butchered to death in a murder. I mean, I don't know, maybe, but not that I had noticed. So I think people were rightly shocked by that. Just seemed, bad taste is to underplay it. So yeah, it may well be that also he's part of this kind of pantheon of great American storytellers and directors and from the 80s and 90s. But also there's a kind of deeply horrific family tragedy which has left two people dead, and you just don't go after those people.
But I mean, I feel like he goes after people suffering from cancer all the time. He goes after Joe Biden is undergoing treatment for cancer, and he has a pop at him every other day. Why no revulsion about that? Well,
I think I think people become acclimatized to politicians criticising politicians, and I know that Joe Biden is getting treatment for cancer, but those two are old sparring partners which people have become quite anaesthetised to, whereas a kind of film director butchered to death in his bed, I mean, that was a reason that was headline grabbing news around the world, a kind of truly horrific and unusual thing to happen.
It was unique in its space, wasn't it? I mean, as you say, he has just torn into John McCain, the great John McCain, who was a war hero in Vietnam, a man of enormously high principle. Had John McCain won that election in 2008, taking on Barack Obama, America would have had a worthy president. He was a man of such stature, and yet he has time and time again torn into John McCain. He didn't have this kind of impact because this was something rather different. It was an extraordinary blend of a complete absence of taste and decency, but also a complete absence of judgment, not to anticipate the reaction that was bound to come attacking someone the day after an awful family murderous tragedy like that, which has split Republicans away, not wholesale, but in a way that has startled so many people, politicians, personalities, all joining in the criticism of the president over that. No, I mean, okay, interesting thought for the day. We have talked about it, of course, time and time again in the studio, but, always interesting to get your thought. Kate, what's your thought for the day?
It's whether... I'm going to pose a question. Should Nigel Farage start getting questions at PMQs? So Nigel Farage today has gone on strike from PMQs because he's angry. So he's not sitting in the chamber along with the 600-odd other MPs, but he came up to sit by us in the press gallery, in the public gallery bit, and he's on strike. And he says PMQs is unfair because Labour keep hurling abuse at him, but he doesn't get any questions, no right of reply, so he can't respond. And he's also accusing the Labour whips of basically kind of fiddling which Labour MPs are asking questions, saying they're always picking Kent MPs who want to have a go studs up at reform. I mean, look, he's got a point, right, which is that Keir Starmer and Labour MPs have one opponent in mind, and that's Nigel Farage, this man sitting kind of opposite to the right of them. It is not Kemi Badenoch, the woman that they're actually sparring with on the front benches. So you have this kind of funny topsy-turvy PMQs where Kemi's having a go at Keir, but Keir's having a go at Nigel. Nigel's not really allowed to have a go at anyone because he doesn't really get any questions. So, he's saying it's all a stitch-up and that it's unfair. It's clearly just how our constitution works, how that weekly PMQ spouts works. But I suppose probably never before has the opinion polls been so kind of out of kilter with the balance of power within the chamber, because the chamber kind of freezes things for 5 years, and the world happens outside. So it's an interesting point. I mean, I suspect we'll see him back in PMQs, but probably also back on strike. Like the junior doctors, one of these rolling strikes, I'm going to predict.
Yeah, I think you've got a point. I mean, haven't you? I mean, when the guy's at the centre of the agenda, I'm not talking about every week getting 3 questions. I mean, Ed Davey gets 3. The Lib Dems get 3 each time. Well, they've got 70-something MPs, which is slightly
But he asked the same question as well.
I have 2 thoughts about this. The first thing, I mean, quite apart from no, he doesn't have a point. He's just moaning. The first thing is he gets exactly the number of questions he's entitled to under the rules. He is entitled to apply for more questions in a ballot every month, I think it is, and for several months in a row he didn't bother.
And they can always stand up at question time and take their chances.
Tice was bobbing today, though, but he didn't get selected.
Well, he should have put in the ballot. Maybe he did this time round, but there was I think it's at the beginning of every term you can put in a ballot for extra questions, and for several months in a row they didn't bother. The second thing I think about this is that all Nigel Farage has to do to be able to change the rules and make things how he would rather they are is win an election, which he has not done. So I'm certain the second he does that, he will change all kinds of rules, but he doesn't get to do that until he wins an election.
You mean a general election? Yeah. When he wins and he's the Prime Minister, he can have a question.
He's got less than a handful of MPs.
Yeah. Maybe a question every few weeks, or
which he gets. He gets a question every few weeks. It's just that he's sore because he's playing football and he doesn't get to pick up the ball and walk it through the goal with no one tackling him. Sorry, that's not how it works.
Are you suggesting that a politician is playing politics?
I'm suggesting that he's playing grievance, which is what he's done for the last 25 years.
All right, good thought. thoughts. Good thoughts. I wonder what you're thinking about that. Join in through the whole hour. Join in. I want to know what you're thinking. Text, tweet, voice note especially. 0333 003 2353 on WhatsApp. In a moment, we're going to talk about the story you heard about in the news there. Tomorrow we're going to be very, very closely watching European leaders getting together and talking about getting, a good wedge of money to Ukraine, badly needed money, 210 billion euros of frozen money. They want to send a wedge of that to Ukraine. Maybe they talk of maybe 100 billion or so, which would include something like 8 billion from the United Kingdom. And now we're talking about some of Roman Abramovich's money, 2.5 billion of that Keir Starmer wants to throw into the pot as well. But while all of this is going on, Times now reporting that Washington, the White House, is telling the Europeans, don't do it. Don't give them that frozen Russian money. And if you do, you're going to have to give the money back. Now, that is pressure. It's not going to go down well among many of the leaders gathering together tomorrow, but it is quite an intervention. And I want to hear your thoughts on that in just a moment, as well as Mikey, as well as Kate. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio.
John Pienaar on Times Radio.
And here with us on Pienaar, friends, Mikey Smith from the Mirror and Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday. Mikey and Kate, this story now coming up. There it is in the Times. American pressure on European leaders not to take that frozen Russian money, 210 billion euros, and send maybe 100 billion in the direction of Ukraine. The argument coming discreetly, although now there it is in the Times, coming out of Washington, is it would make a ceasefire less likely. It would encourage Ukraine to keep on fighting. Well, no doubt it would certainly do that. And then in the background, we have the original peace plan, a couple of peace plans ago, where America was talking about that frozen money going America's way to be spent with American firms in the reconstruction of Ukraine. I mean, again, another extraordinary story in the Times. Mikey, what do you think?
I think this is somewhat inevitable, because this is Donald Trump having made plans for everyone that involve this seized cash. And I think when Donald Trump makes a peace plan, it often involves America going into joint ventures with other countries in the aftermath. And I think that's what this is clearly what's happened here. America has plans for this seized cash. And is warning European nations, if you give it to Ukraine, you're just going to have to give it back. And I'm not entirely sure where they get the authority to be throwing around things like that. But the idea of having to give it back is all sort of reliant on Trump's peace plan going ahead, which there's no indication that either side is going to approve of it as written, or negotiate it to a place where they all feel comfortable with it. So I don't know how much weight this warning will carry with European countries who are probably a little bit sick of Donald Trump bossing them about at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's an astonishing story. We obviously heard today that PM and Europe were going ahead with unfreezing those, trying to unfreeze those assets and get them to Ukraine. This has been the long promise of both this regime and the ones before it, and it seems to have been really stuck in this quagmire of kind of, yes, rows within the EU, but also kind of legal obligations. Will you be sued or not. And the latest for our country, obviously, is that 2.5 billion, which Abramovich promised from the sale of Chelsea FC a few years ago, that could now end up in court action in an attempt to kind of really funnel that cash to Ukraine in the opposition, it seems, of Abramovich himself. If Trump really sets himself, it really depends. I can see this story is about a source close to the US talks. So I think the question now over the next couple of days is, does Trump really go to war with this? As ever, there are sources close to Trump that believe different things. It all comes down to the man himself. But if Donald Trump really decides to go to war with Europe and say, I don't want these frozen assets at all to go to Ukraine, then that will be a really, really difficult thing for Europe to take on. I think they'd need to take it on as a bloc, obviously with as much diplomatic skill as possible. I suspect what you're going to have is a lot of kind of frenzied diplomatic talks behind the scenes to try and get the ear of Donald Trump, because we do see this, different factions wanting different things, and his ear being got at on different days by different people. So I imagine Keir and co will be desperately trying to persuade him that, look, this cash should be going to Ukraine, that they talked about it being used exclusively for humanitarian purposes. So I expect they're going to hammer that notion that it won't be going on front line kind of guns and missiles and things. It's humanitarian purposes.
But I think some of this money would be going on.
Well, they were talking at Huddle today after PMQs about it being exclusively humanitarian. I have to say, I haven't dug into that too much, but they were talking about it being... Were you there, Mikey, too?
I was not.
They seem to be what they were saying today, but I haven't dug into that too much.
No, but this story is playing out, as it were, in real time. I mean... And you're right, the Europeans are not as one on this. The Times reports today that Giorgia Meloni of Italy is one of those who are more reluctant about this. We know Belgium's deeply reluctant about this, which is one of the reasons why the leaders getting together tomorrow are going to be looking at workarounds, at the use of qualified majority voting. So most of the countries could decide to go ahead with this despite the reservations. But Donald Trump pitching in this way, it will go down very badly privately. You're not going to see European leaders tomorrow tearing into Donald Trump over this. And for one reason, I think you made the point yourself, Mikey, they won't be wildly surprised by this. They know, where White House thinking comes on this subject, and they try and work with it and around it.
No, the thing about Donald Trump and his peace deals around the world are that there's always something in it for America in these peace deals. And I think the risk is, and I think the calculation a lot of countries will be making, is it possible to reach a peace in this conflict without America getting involved? And how can we? Is there any way to sweeten this deal enough for Donald Trump to not just walk away, which he has threatened to do a number of times? I mean, the figures in here in the leaked peace plan, there's $200 billion to be put into a separate US-Russian investment vehicle for joint projects. This is not... Donald Trump's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. He wants to get something out of it at the end of it for all the time and effort he's putting into it. So it is going to come down to, from Trump's point of view, whether he's going to be better off at the end of it than he is now, and if not, he might just walk away, which I think will be part of the calculation.
Well, that's the ultimate fear, isn't it? And in the meantime, the deal that was put together by the Europeans and America did involve some movement by and promises from America. They were talking about what it was described as a NATO treaty Article 5 like a promise to give a security guarantee. In the case of America, they were not talking about what some of the European partners were doing, which was talking about supporting Ukraine if Russia invaded again. In the American case, it seemed to involve such things as satellite surveillance of what was going on the ground. Was Russia breaking a ceasefire deal? Maybe intelligence, which is what they've been providing for large parts of the war, not all of it, but large parts. And it is conceivable that if Donald Trump takes it into his head, he could withdraw even that sort of offer, which is just another reason why the European leaders don't want an open bust-up with him. They can't afford it. It does not serve them. And meanwhile, they'll be watching Donald Trump, doing what he's doing here, or not exactly watching it in an open meeting, but hearing about it, knowing about it from their diplomatic contacts, and watching what's going on here, these private warnings, and contrasting that pressure, indirect pressure from America on Ukraine, with the absence of American pressure on Putin.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's going to be another really tense few days as we see these talks carried out in Brussels. It's been reported that Zelensky's going to make this kind of formal request for those assets finally. There's a really tricky choice facing both European allies of Ukraine and Ukraine itself, which is, what can you, as Mikey was saying, what can you persuade America to carry on doing realistically? What can you realistically do without their help? Which, put totally brutally, I suspect is not that much. And can you sort of navigate them, lever them to a position where you're getting as much as you can out of them and putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position while crucially keeping the White House on board. And I suspect we've just got in a position where you just need that US military might, that intelligence might, and also financial, to really realistically be able to take on a kind of violent, aggressive, expansionist dictatorship like Putin in Russia, which is happy to throw cash and bodies at a war in a way that Europe just cannot currently solo, it doesn't feel like, compete with.
Isn't there kind of an inevitability to the way that this is going to play out? And the Europeans have come together, they put together some sort of plan, another draft of a peace proposal together with the American side, talking to Jared Kushner, to Steve Witkoff, and the Americans, from what we see, seem to be okay with that, putting that on the table to Russia and presenting it to Putin, who will duly say, well, you can take this, I've no interest in this, I'm making no such concession. And so back it goes to Trump. And where do we go from there? I guess maybe, I say who knows, I think we kind of do know. Maybe more talk from the President Trump, well, give me 2 weeks and I'll tell you what I'm going to do about this. 2 weeks comes and then nothing very much changes. And so the awful dance goes on. I was talking to your colleague, Kate, Jerome Starkey, about another outstanding piece of work in the Sun today. He'd been to Ukraine on the front line, went to a hospital where British medics were working with Ukrainian war wounded, including a woman who'd lost 3 of her limbs and was still making jokes about wanting to go back to the front line. That kind of courage is what we're talking about. That's the real story of Ukraine. These people watching the high level diplomacy going on in its own, in so many ways, tawdry way. It kind of breaks your heart.
It sounds just so kind of, I don't know, naff or flat to say this, but it's truly tragic, isn't it? Because they are in an existential, fight for their very existence as a democratic, free, open, sovereign state. Look at the 20th, well, you can look beyond the 20th century, but take the last 100 years of Russia. It's very clear what Russia is out to get. They want more territory. They want kind of mother Russia to expand. And for Ukraine on the border, along with other countries on the border, this is a fight for their very survival. In this war, you'll have people who have invested so much emotionally, given up so much, who would have seen family members killed, lost homes, see their cities and towns destroyed. I think any kind of compromised peace deal is going to obviously be really, really difficult for them to stomach, as it seems as an all-out fight. The reality, you say, where does this go next? Yes, it may kind of eke out over the weeks. You go back to the US, back to Russia, back to the US. I suppose if you can kind of eke out American support for longer, then that is a good thing. I suspect we get to a point in this conflict now where, you're talking, about serious compromises to freeze it. And that will be, the question will be how deep are those compromises, and can that be stomached by Ukraine?
Yeah, I think this is the other side of Trump's deal making, is that sort of going unsaid in the idea that if you give out this money, you'll have to give it back. Part of that is we're going to have to give some of it back to Russia, which is, I think. I think the idea of rewarding Russia for what it has done, either through territory or through letting it keep hold of assets like this, is really, really distasteful for a lot of people, particularly in Europe, where it poses the risk of something like this happening again.
Tomorrow's EU summit is going to be such an important, in its way, important political event, isn't it? And we can see how much is said out loud, which is going to be not quite the same as what's being said privately, as ever. That's why, our people on the ground there, we're very keen to hear what they're saying and writing after this event tomorrow. But we're going to be watching that event very, very closely. Obviously, the Times is going to be across it, every little bit of it, and we'll be talking about it, in a great deal of detail and depth here on Times Radio as well. Probably this time tomorrow. I say probably, you can bet that's what's going to happen. Kate Borsay is here to tell us what happens at 7 o'clock after this show. Hi, Kate.
Yeah, John, we'll pick up on that as well. The story that it's actually Donald Trump that is encouraging European leaders, some European leaders, not to release those frozen Russian assets. It was a really interesting story, that one, emerging ahead of that key summit tomorrow regarding financing for Ukraine. We'll be joined by the BMA tonight, the British Medical Association. Their Resident Doctors Committee Deputy Co-Chair, Dr. Shivam Sharma, will join us. We'll talk to them about what we've heard from Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting, whether mediation is something that they would be happy to engage in through a company like ACAS. We'll talk about the message that this sends out, whether they are concerned about public opinion turning away from them, and whether there is a world where they are prepared to accept a smaller pay rise or no pay rise at all, or does this just continue? This is the 14th resident doctors' strike in 33 months. It cannot continue, can it, simply? And so where does this go next? We'll speak to them about that, and plenty of interesting discussion points there. And we'll also talk about as well the news that police will arrest protesters who chant "Globalise the Intifada." Do they even know what they're chanting for, is my question, because Intifada comes from the word uprising, and it's become known in other forms, anything from protesting against Jewish people in Palestinian lands to wiping out Jewish people in Israel. So I think that there's an interpretation issue here, and you wonder whether the protesters chanting it understand what it means. I'm not saying that I forgive them for that. So this is interesting today, I think, in terms of terminology and words, and do you know what you're calling for, and do we have a common definition for it as well? So we'll take a little look at that. Plenty on the show.
All right, that's what's coming up at 7 o'clock. Kate Borsay on Times Radio. Now, after the news, we're going to be looking at, well, as much as we can pack in the time that we got left, the new General Secretary at the top of the Unison Union, something of a firebrand, as if the government needed that at this particular point, with the doctors striking and more pay demands, heavy ones, coming down the line, backed up by the threat of more strike action in the public sector. We'll talk about that. And it's a big night tonight in America. Donald Trump is addressing the nation live at 2 a.m. our time, 9 p.m. US time. What on earth has he got to say? I think we've got a fair idea. He's going to be telling about a fantastic job he's doing on the American economy. We can maybe look at that with a certain objective eye, and we'll have a go at that too, and as much else as we can squeeze in here on Times Radio on Pienaar and Friends at 6:31.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker. John Pienaar on Times Radio.
And Kate Ferguson's with me from The Sun on Sunday, and Mikey Smith from the Mirror. So there's been a change at the top on Unison, the mighty public service union. I think Labour's biggest single union backer. Andrea Egan is the new General Secretary. She was expelled from Labour 3 years ago for liking a Marxist message on social media. She's now saying she's going to hold the government's feet to the fire. No blank cheques and other similar phrases. What are they going to be thinking about this, Kate?
Well, as soon as this announcement was made this morning, I was receiving texts from people inside Labour. It's going to send shockwaves through Labour. There's no hiding from it. This is a huge blow for Keir Starmer. So this woman, she's a left-winger. Those Marxist articles she's sharing on social media a few years ago, that socialist appeal, probably best known to your listeners as old militant group in, militant back in the 80s, the ones that were, that famous Neil Kinnock speech, getting rid of him from Labour conference. Anyway, they're back, folks. So this is a huge blow for Keir Starmer. It means that one of his biggest trade union allies is now basically an enemy within, I would suspect. I suspect we're going to be looking at a much more militant Unison. Looking ahead, are we going to be seeing more public sector strikes? Your news obviously referring to the junior doctors' strikes. Well, maybe we ain't seen nothing yet if Unison are going to be joining those kind of militant tendencies. You're also going to see Team Keir weakened on the Labour NEC board. That sounds boring, doesn't it? But it's not actually boring, because that is where elections and key rule changes are all debated. So it's absolutely crucial to have power over the NEC. That was a big part of the Starmer project, to wrest control of this kind of shadowy but hugely influential organisation back off the Corbynistas, and that's kind of what booted the far left out of Labour a few years ago. And of course you've got the cash question, the money question. I mean, Unison aren't going to just like that disaffiliate. Sharon Graham, who's the far left leader of Unite, is desperate for Unite to disaffiliate, but it ain't that easy. So this woman might want Unison to disaffiliate, won't happen, but they have quite a lot of power in curbing how much donations are given. Now that's going to be a big problem with Labour if they decide to cut some of those checks ahead of a general election, or indeed the local elections. So I think you're seeing a kind of remilitarisation of some of these trade unions, and a big... I'm sure they're self-proclaimed militants, Mikey. Mikey's sniggering at me, but they're self-proclaimed militants. Clues in the title, Mikey.
Mikey is chuckling. So Katie from The Sun sees this as, if not the end of the world for the Labour Party, then very close to it.
Not the end of the world.
I said very close to it. Not quite the end of the world, but maybe somewhere close to it. And Mikey from The Mirror, you are indeed chuckling, Mikey.
I'm chuckling a little bit, not because I don't think this is an absolute nightmare for Keir Starmer. It definitely is, but I think it's an administrative nightmare rather than an existential one.
What is an administrative?
An administrative nightmare. I think losing support on the NEC is going to be a big problem for him. That, as Kate says, that was a big thing he wanted to do, and this has put a stick in the spokes of that. Do I think this is going to make Unison into a militant operation? I don't, because the members of Unison are normal people who, they're public service workers, they're people who work for councils, people who are social workers, they are normal folk, and I think the turnout required to win the General Secretary election, if I'm not mistaken, is quite a lot lower than the turnout required to authorise strike action.
Yeah, the turnout was 7%.
Yeah.
Which is about standard for that. You might think that's particularly low.
No, but
that's about standard.
Yeah,
actually.
it's sort of
very
normally
disengaged
miserable.
Exactly.
But I think it's one thing for the members of a union to want to give not only a fairly moderate general secretary, but also one of Keir Starmer's staunchest allies in the union movement a bit of a kicking, and to replace her with someone who is not that. I think it's another thing to bring the country to a standstill when that's. I don't feel like the membership of that particular union are radical in that way. Well, to that extent.
Far be it from me to have an argue with the esteemed Mikey Smith from the Mirror. However, I'm just going to make a few points. So yes, I mean, look, union GenSec votes don't have much membership engagement. Most trade union membership today isn't particularly, don't see it as particularly a political thing. They see it as a kind of insurance policy against bad bosses. So you've just got a bit of a shift in terms of how people view their trade union membership that's happened over the last couple of generations, which is why these big important votes tend to be kind of won or lost according to, like, really, in the grand scheme of things, not many very politically engaged factions. And that's why this will be really quite a blow to the moderates and quite a victory to the hard left. The other thing I would say, which I just think, I'm actually really surprised, Mikey, look at the last few years of trade union industrial action and tell me it's nothing to do with the leadership and everything to do with the membership. We had the most militant nurses union leadership we'd ever seen, and we had nurses strike for the first time, I think it was ever. Was it ever? You've got junior doctors, those folk that are highly educated, have careers held in high esteem, a brilliant career path, and actually really good salaries once you make your way up those grades in hospitals. You have them; they're on the barricades now. I mean, gone are the days when it's kind of miners and steel workers and car plant workers on the barricades. Now it's kind of your PhD students and your public sector workers. So I think Mikey may well end up eating his hat over those.
Although accepting what you're saying there, if we accept what you're saying for the sake of argument, then it also tells you that the public sector workers who are represented by Unison are represented by their new hardline general secretary. I mean, very good chance they'd have been pretty militant whoever was in charge. I mean, the various groups of workers, the nurses, the RCN, they've rejected the pay offer. They're going to be involved in balancing over strike action. That's going to go for other groups of NHS workers. And around the public sector, there is a wave about to break. We sort of saw this at election time, and that's just building up and building up. And another firebrand at the top of Unison will just give it a voice and a face. But the trouble was coming anyway. No,
I don't think this is a kind of like anarchic, spontaneous uprising. I think that leadership, what the union GenSec and their allies say to their members, what they put forward, what they agitate for publicly, has massive impact. And I think actually we've totally seen that in the types of strikes we've seen. So I totally take dispute actually just with the fundamentals, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think they've got a problem with public sector workers. Don't you think? I mean, it's hard to deny that.
Yeah, I don't think... I think you're right. I think in this situation, if there's a problem that Keir Starmer has, it's not necessarily with the top of the union. It's with everybody in the union who are, understandably quite upset. I'm the kind of person who doesn't think it's a bad thing for union leadership to be, to a certain extent, at odds with the Prime Minister. I think that's probably quite a healthy way to run a democracy.
But I'm so sorry. That's Mikey, that is a vacuous thing to say. I'm sorry. What on earth do you mean by that? Do you defend these junior doctors' strikes? Do you think Unison should go on strike? Which bit of Unison do you back strikes for? What is a good level of public sector pay? These are the tangibles. You can't just say it's good for democracy to have rows.
I don't think I have to be in support of every strike that happens to be supportive of the concept of people going on strike. I think that's
not what I was saying. That's a willful misunderstanding of my point.
I would never.
He doesn't care. Mikey's just a red wrecker.
No, I mean,
my employers will be delighted to hear that.
I'm not arguing with the right to strike. Anyway.
All right, more coming up. We're going to look ahead, I think, for a moment at the President of the United States' big event this evening, the speech, presumably in the Oval Office at 9 o'clock Washington time, 2 a.m. our time. Let's talk about that with Lara Spirit, who better, the Washington correspondent for the time. All of that coming up on Pienaar and Friends here on Times Radio.
Pienaar on Times Radio.
And here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday, Mikey Smith from The Mirror, and a very good evening evening where we are, to Lara Spirit, the Washington correspondent for The Times, who's going to be joining us to just look ahead to the Donald Trump experience, the latest Donald Trump experience, but he's going to be telling about great things to come, the great things that have been done under the Trump administration in this stage in his second term. We'll see what he says, but one or two safe bets can be made, can't they? It's going to be about the triumph of the American economy. It'll be about, no doubt, the triumph of the tariffs that he's introduced, and about his being able to control the cost of living, and all of which are interesting because all of those things are heavily disputed, but not that will stop the president making some pretty extravagant claims, Kate.
Yes, I think it's all going to be about his big, beautiful year, what was, and probably the big, beautiful year to come. So I suspect it'll be lots of big top-thumping speech hailing his own success. I mean, Trump is a man who is not shy of hailing his own successes.
No, he's not. Lara Spirit on the line now from Washington. Hello to you, Lara.
Hi, John.
I think we're reaching a bit of a consensus so far that we should not expect President Trump to hide his light under a bushel when it comes to economic achievement. What are you looking forward to?
Yes, so we had an intervention from JD Vance, the Vice President, yesterday. He gave a big speech on affordability in Pennsylvania, of course, a key swing state, where he said that the crisis of affordability was real, but he obviously put the blame squarely at President Biden's door. He is making the case that actually we're going to see a lot of benefits coming in the new year and into the next year in terms of tax cuts, and of course President Trump himself has dangled the possibility of direct cash injections for struggling voters. So I think you'll hear quite a bit about that. You'll hear probably from President Trump in terms of the economy on some of those things we've heard before, falling gas prices, for example. They also tie their deportation efforts to what will in their view mean that more Americans could buy homes, for example. So I think you'll likely hear stuff on the economy. Trump before, it's been quite difficult sometimes to keep on message on the economy. He's referred numerous times to affordability as a hoax, a Democrat con job. And I think one of the reasons why you saw JD Vance dispatched to quite a similar area actually is where Trump did a rally just a week or so ago, was because Vance is known for being pretty on message, particularly on these questions on the economy. And I think yesterday really landed what the Republicans want voters to hear at a time when Democrats are making inroads on this question of the economy.
But I guess it's true. I want to bring in Casey and Mike, Lara, but I guess it's also true that this is a speech that's needed now by the president. Yeah, that we're heading into Christmas, so do a kind of round-up speech, sure. But there's pressure there. The president's ratings in the polls have had a pretty marked slide on various measures of his achievement and performance in the office of president, on the economy included. I mean, the affordability hoax. Well, a lot of people in America don't quite see it as an affordability hoax. They see it as an affordability problem. They don't believe that it's all good news. Maybe they think it's worse than, on some measures, than objectively you could say that it is. But in politics, the perception is very, very important. And the president must surely feel rather up against it, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've had a slate of election victories for the Democrats in recent months. We had those governor contests, which the Democrats clinched in New Jersey and also Virginia. But last week, for example, we had a Miami victory for the Democrats in the mayoral contest. The first time a Democrat will hold that position in 28 years. So they are making some really significant gains here. And you do, when you look at the polls, see that voters do struggle very much with affordability, even in circumstances where, you know, inflation is not spiraling. But you do certainly have, I mean, grocery prices climbing by something like 49% since 2020, for example. And last week I spent a few days in Pennsylvania, in areas around the Lehigh Valley, so similar to where JD Vance was speaking yesterday, for example. And I was talking particularly to young and Hispanic voters, those voters that helped form that new coalition that drove Trump to his second term in the White House, who are really struggling with rising prices, particularly grocery prices. And polling does bear this out, that voters are very much struggling with the cost of living at the moment, and particularly among those newer voters, those swing voters that came to his camp in the recent election. That is something that they're growing increasingly dissatisfied with the Trump.
Yeah, it was an American strategist who famously coined that expression when he was asked, look, what are elections really all about? He said it's the economy stupid, and that has endured as an immortal phrase. Mikey, Kate, what are you thinking?
Oh, yeah, I was thinking two things. First of all, that I guess when does the issue become Trump's to own? So he's done this big offensive, him and Vance, where he's laying the blame for basically everything at Biden's door, really stridently. But he's also come in and sort of said, I can kind of power through and make changes, being this kind of big, charismatic president. And I guess, Lara, I'm interested in your opinion. Like, do you think now we've come to the point in the election cycle where he owns it, but previously it was kind of like okay and would sell to voters that it was still Biden's fault? Have we reached a turning point on that?
I think that's a really good question. I think it is quite hard to say, but it looks like, given these recent victories, it's something that they're definitely worried about. And I think because you saw Trump go to that rally, the first rally in something like 5 months, to talk about specifically affordability, and then JD Vance hot on his heels to do the same, it's clearly something that Republicans can see in the polls has cause to be worried about. It is harder. I mean, Trump asked by Politico in a recent interview, for example, how he would rate his management of the economy. And I can't remember how many pluses he gave, but there were quite a few. It was A++. I actually literally can't remember. And JD Vance yesterday said be A+++. So also a very effusive rating for the current administration's management of the economy. I think one of the things that they are trying to get across to voters, and this is something you heard JD Vance say multiple times yesterday, he said Rome wasn't built in a day. And multiple times he said, voters are wise and they understand that we need patience. And actually, they're not necessarily a great deal of the way through the second administration, as you suggest, and they are hoping that given a bit more time, given these tax cuts and wider economic headwinds, that they will be able to make some progress on this question of affordability, and they won't see by the midterms, for example, a huge siphoning off of support on account of this question.
Yeah, and then there are those checks, Lara. Is it $2,000 a household, which are going to be making their way into American pockets in time for the midterm elections?
Yeah, and I mean also, these there's a multi-billion package of aid for farmers, for example, another kind of big boon that the Trump administration wants to talk about. So they are going some way to saying, actually, we are providing more support to voters at the moment. Of course, you do have some Republicans in Congress who are saying, actually, that might not be enough. And basically, at the end of the day, if voters don't feel like they are getting any more comfortable on account of this administration, then they will punish us at the ballot box. And I think particularly in swing states, you're seeing some concern about that question.
Okay.
I do wonder how much of this smells a little bit like desperation in the air for really the first time, because he did this rally last week, which hilariously took place in a function room at a casino, where he was going to talk about affordability, and obviously went violently off message and started declaring it a hoax and all this. And then since then, you've had the White House suggesting that people should be buying their children fewer dolls this Christmas because that's the patriotic thing to do, when so that he can do all of his tariffs. And I wonder, Laura, I don't know if you know how recently this address to the nation has been arranged. I suspect probably quite recently, because for many reasons, not least of which is it's going to interrupt the final of Survivor on CBS tonight, which is like a 3-hour-long thing, which is still popular. And I think if they were planning it much ahead of time, they would have probably avoided that time slot.
Laura?
I can't say for certain. I'm afraid. But certainly, I mean, Trump is rarely averse to last-minute appearances in front of the media. He's incredibly comfortable. And if he felt that he wanted to say something at this point, I'm sure he could have just arranged it hastily. It feels like, I mean, listening to Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, saying that she'd been talking to him ahead of this and that he wanted to talk both about his achievements, but also about what we might see in the new year. It feels certainly like something they're putting a lot of work into ahead of this evening.
Oh, yeah. Before you, and always lovely to have you here, Laura. Before you leave us, the story in the Times now. It's by David Charter, your Washington colleague, in partnership with Bruno Waterfield, the Brussels correspondent for the Times, about the the White House putting discreet pressure, I say discreet, but not very open and public or openly declared pressure, on European leaders not to go ahead and freeze those Russian assets, 210 billion euros worth of them, and then send maybe 100 million or so in the direction of Ukraine, warning them not to do that. the White House view, according to David's piece, is that the White House considers that would just prolong the war, and they've also, in the very recent past, spoken about the need for some of that money when it comes to reconstruction to make its way into American company pockets. Have you been picking up any of that? I wonder how that's going to play there.
Well, it's really interesting and obviously comes at something of a crucial time for this question of peace in Ukraine. We know that Zelensky is going to ask EU leaders personally tomorrow to use those frozen Russian assets to support the country's war efforts. So this intervention, as you say, revealed by my colleague David Charter and also Bruno, is a really important one and shows that Washington has been privately placing some pressure. And I think at the time when journalists are trying to pass every public utterance from those in the White House and surrounding it and adjacent to it about this question of Ukraine and where the allegiances lie and where the support is and what the future direction might be, it's a really significant story. And as you say, it's online now.
Yeah, there'll be questions no doubt in America on, well, as this story plays out, as it no doubt will tomorrow, along with the decision of those European Union leaders. Lara Spirit, lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much for dropping by. We're going to be calling on you again because you can bet we're always going to do that. Lara Spirit there in Washington. In a moment, guys, I want to ask you for your end of the programme predictions for whatever you want to throw into the hat where that's concerned. But I don't want to close up without just getting a quick thought of you on where we are with the doctors' dispute, which of course kicks off today. And now talk of, where's this going to go? It's a total deadlock. Do you imagine we're going to see Wes Streeting agreeing to the pressure which is coming from NHS leaders to go to arbitration at ACAS? Talked about this to ACAS earlier on. They're ready and willing, and they say able. They haven't had the final request, but there was a hope among some of those NHS leaders that would come after these 5 days of strikes are out of the way. Have you got a guess on that?
Yeah, I mean, so there's these requests to go to ACAS. ACAS, if you don't know what that is basically this kind of arbitration. They basically kind of get involved in a dispute between employer and employee and see if they can't work it out. It's usually something you go to once you're moving a bit, usually towards end play. So I suspect Wes probably thinks junior doctors are just too far away. But sure, I mean, like, why not? Let's go to ACAS. What I would say is I just think it's wild. What is this, the 57th day of strike actions? It's been rolling on for years. Their pay demands just seem to be out of this world. And I'm just wondering, why is it that they're sticking with these strikes and actually turnout being relatively high, approval for the strikes among membership still being relatively high? So it doesn't really, while public support for it has absolutely plummeted, while their colleagues don't like it, junior doctors seem pretty wedded to it, pretty kind of stuck in. And I'm just wondering, is it because there's just no blowback for them? Like, what repercussions are there for them? They pick and choose when they go on a strike. I'm sure there's probably all right strike pay. I'm not sure what their union offers. They probably get good overtime if they need to make up the pay. So I think it's that thing of what negative impact is it having on them? It's a total nightmare for the patients, but I suspect the junior doctors, it's no skin off their back if they're striking again.
What's your point on this, Mikey?
I think that might be a good way for Wes Streeting to get it off his desk temporarily. It is a guess. I'm not basing that on anything I've been told, but I think Kate's right. I think it's too early. I think they're too far apart. But if ACAS reckon they can have some conversations, then fine, and it makes Wes Streeting look like he's willing to talk but not willing to budge if it doesn't come to anything.
It's a way out without losing face too much, isn't it? Got a minute left. Your prediction, Mikey? My
prediction is that the Melania Trump documentary will be much more entertaining than it's supposed to be. The trailer came out for this today, and I urge everyone to watch it. It looks amazing. It's beautifully shot. It looks like a multi-million-dollar movie, and I'm desperate to see it now.
What's yours?
That sounds fun. Maybe I will watch that this Christmas. Well, it's Christmas time, festive time, where men should put away their grievances and we should all be friends. So maybe my counterintuitive prediction is that no leader will face a leadership challenge next year. Kemi, Keir, they'll both be safe, and they'll have a Christmas, New Year's truce, and it will be peace among all men in 2026.
Goodness me!
But I'm not going to eat my hat over that.
Okay. I don't know, we'll maybe leave that in the end. Why not? Christmas is coming. Kate and Mikey, thank you so much, and thank you for listening. Ollie Cole was our producer, and Isaac Marley was managing the whole thing at the keyboards. Kate's up next, and this is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It is 7 o'clock. This is the